A look into our crystal balls for the 2027 first and second round ADPs. That's what we're doing today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. Also, check out the Best of Stealing Signals reference guide. It's on sale at Gumroad and Lemon Squeezy, a couple online marketplaces. It's like a long book you can go check out. With me as always.
And Ben, this is spectacular. People are ready for the round 1 and 2 here, but this is spectacular. You sent it to me. I was so excited. I had my name mentioned in it relatively early. I mean, you send somebody something and their name is like, they can find it in the first 20 minutes. They're just over the moon. And you sent me the cover. The first thing that I thought about all of this, like, it looks super cool. It's arranged in a fantastic format. This is event reading. If you enjoy any part of what we do here for Stealing Bananas, you have to get this product from Ben Gretch. It is the book you've been waiting for on fantasy football. All right, go.
With me as always is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his work over at RotoViz, including, I got to do the big sell point now, the recently released this week Zero RB guide, or Zero RB countdown. 15-1, 3 pieces. You've got 5-1 out today, this morning. I have not even gotten a chance to see that. I see the cover boy is Arian Foster, looking for the next Chris Johnson or Arian Foster. I love the old cover boys. Arian Foster.
I don't think Arian Foster is in the NFL. It is funny because when the second one dropped, Ben and I were doing a main event, and he's like, I looked at it, it's like, don't like that one, don't like that one, don't like that one.
Yeah. From 10 to 5, I think 10, 9, and 8 were ones I was like, nope. But 7 and 6, I told you I had both of them in our draft that we're doing together, and I was pretty pumped about those. 5 through 1, I just scrolled through. Fantastic names. Excited to read that later. We are predicting today next year's ADP. We are predicting the 2027 first and second round. We have done this now. We believe for this will be the 6th season. This is our 6th season on the podcast. The only reason I'm saying that or coming to that conclusion is I went looking for last year's results, because we always kind of do a little bit of a discussion of what we did last year and how it went. And I found stuff with Tyreek Hill and Alvin Kamara in it. And I was like, this is not last year's, predicting the 2026 first and second round. This is from much earlier. I found the sheet eventually that had the other two, but there's at least, I believe, 5 seasons that we found. I think we did it the very first year in 2021 when we launched this podcast. We've now done it for 5 straight years. It is always our most requested episode. People started asking this year, Shawn, in like June. I'm like, guys, we do this like a few weeks before week 1 every year. And it's a little later this year, probably on August 20th, we're recording it. But that's because week 1's a little bit later. And that's just sort of the way that this season has worked out. But we are here to tell you who was going to go in the first and second round next year. And the reason we've used this framework since the beginning is this has always been a framework for how we draft this season, is you want to find players in the later rounds who can jump in value from something like an 8th round ADP or something all the way up into the first or second round next year. You want the breakout superstars. And it's when we talk about like the dead zone over the years, and we talk about how there's been young players, young running backs that have hit from there. The point I always emphasize is it's young running backs that hit out of the dead zone because we didn't know what they were yet. And then after that, they go in the first couple rounds the rest of the way. They are the like legendary upside running backs that Corain always talks about the next year. We just weren't sure what they were, and we were devaluing them by ADP. And then they become stalwarts in the top. Like Derrick Henry early in his career was a dead zone back who smashed, and then he just became a staple in the first and second round for years and years and years. Jahmyr Gibbs early in his career was a dead zone back who hit, and then he's been Breece Hall coming off the knee injury his rookie year. In year 2 was a dead zone back who hit, and now he's consistently pre-dead zone back since then. Although he's been in bad offenses, he's a round 3 guy this year. Definitely think of him as a pre-dead zone back. That's that concept out of the dead zone. It's also the same concept for some of the breakout receivers that we're thinking about, young receivers in the later rounds. You think about guys like Garrett Wilson after his rookie year, and then he's going up there. Brian Thomas is a guy, as we go looking into last year's mistakes, Shawn, both you and I had as a top 6 guy going into the 2026 ADP, because he was a 1-2 turn guy in year 2 and looked like, hey, by the time he's in year 3, yeah, he's going to be a superstar. And so this is a dude that is another example of the rookie year phenomenon of going round 8, round 9, and the next year you're going at the 1-2 turn. Those are the profiles that we're trying to target. I have to say to you, Shawn, that's the point of the exercise. I think last year when we came in, because a lot of the top couple rounds stayed healthy in 2024, and we said it was kind of hard to get a lot of like exciting names in because all these guys stayed healthy, and we kind of just were predicting the same stuff. And our list last year looked really similar. This year, even though everyone stayed healthy at the top again, everything has been such chaos in the NFL going through the season last year. Obviously, a lot of the favorites didn't even make the playoffs team-wise. Seahawks end up winning the Super Bowl. Right after the Super Bowl, we've talked about this on the show. There was a ton of parity in the next year's Super Bowl odds. No one knows what's going to happen with the 2026 NFL season. It's something that I think is not being discussed enough right now, as everybody's getting way too certain about fantasy football takes and everything. We're going into a season in a time with the NFL where there's a lot of evolution. There's a lot of different ways this could go. And so when I sat down to try to look in my crystal ball, it was very cloudy. This was the hardest time I've ever had putting together a list like this, Shawn. We famously, we never look at each other's lists until basically we get on and press record. I have not looked deep into your list at all. You sent it to me earlier, and I made sure, you wrote spoilers in the name. I made sure not to look until just now. I pulled it into a spreadsheet. I saw a couple of your top names. I don't even know who you have in the second round or anything yet. We're going to work through this with the listeners in real time. It's the way we've always done it. Number one, I want to ask you if you felt the same way, because for me, this was torturous to do. And I felt like, especially by about like number 5 or number 6 overall, I felt like I wanted 10 names, and I didn't want any of them in the second round, and I wanted them all in the middle of the first round. And it was like, yeah, I want to bring some guys up there, and I don't want to move guys back. There's a lot of ways I could see this season going for a lot of different teams, and that would dramatically affect whether their good players could be first round picks next year, or they wouldn't even be in this exercise in the first 2 rounds. It's really hard because some of the really fun young superstar teams aren't very good. You have like the element of, we always do this as a tight end premium exercise because we get to talk about a different position is the main reason, not because we care more about tight end premium. It's a fake exercise anyway, but it allows us to talk about the top of the tight end position and work it into the exercise. Obviously, Brock Bowers is going to come up today, but so is Ashton Jeanty. We don't know anything about what the Raiders are going to look like with a rookie QB, how he's going to look, how Clint Kubiak's going to assimilate. And then same thing over in Arizona with Trey McBride and Jeremiah Love. And how's Mike LaFleur going to assimilate there? What their Carson Beck potentially, what their quarterback situation is going to be. There's a lot of young talent on those types of offenses right now. It was a terribly difficult exercise for me this year. Did you feel similar?
I mean, yes and no. It was fun. There are some names that are tough. And, just to give a tiny bit in the way of spoilers, I think that Chase Brown is a fantastic player in a fantastic spot. And I think he's arguably undervalued, and yet I put him below where he's going in drafts. Justin Jefferson, obviously a superstar, maybe the best wide receiver, maybe the best overall player in the NFL. He gets a weird position in my countdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown, quietly the best receiver from a fantasy perspective in the NFL over the last 3 years, 2.5, what have you. And he gets a really weird spot. One of the things I was trying to do as I worked through it was to think about not necessarily the most likely outcome, which in many ways just puts the guys back pretty close to their ADPs, but to think about sort of the next level, both on the positive and the negative side, outcomes that are actually still quite likely. We're not talking about like 95th percentile or 5th percentile outcomes, still very likely outcomes that if you factor them in, how does that change the movement a little bit? And then you're trying to do some fun things. Think through, what could happen with some young guys. Certainly, part of this is always just moving the old guys who have a lot of risk out, because that risk is meaningful. And when you sum the various likely outcomes, it actually doesn't look good for the old players, even if we know that they have stopped. I mean, Derrick Henry is someone who, one of the things that was interesting with some of the offseason research that I did and the injury research, it actually made me feel a little bit more comfortable with the outliers, in that even though we're dealing with small samples for those guys in terms of their individual careers, and each season for them, right, is a pretty limited instance. It's not like these individual guys are playing 30 years and you can say, okay, well, this guy is just different. We can see that over his 30 years. I mean, you're still talking about just a handful of years the player has played. And yet the injury research and some of the efficiency and production things that I did alongside that made me feel more comfortable with individual guys actually being individuals in a way that you can track over the course of years when you're looking at players. And so in some ways, I'm more open to the idea that old players could stick if they have stuck to this point. And yet, Ben, I mean, we're still moving them out.
Yeah, we really are. All right, I'm going to do a quick pass on the 2025 stuff. It's not that interesting this year to review, but we always kind of have. And so it's helpful in terms of like sort of what, not necessarily what we got wrong or what we were thinking or whatever, but in terms of like what kinds of decisions we have to make going forward as we do this exercise and sort of why we do some of the things. You mentioned the idea of like not wanting to just kind of keep guys near their ADP, which I'm kind of I was running into too. Like we want this exercise to mean something or at least be helpful. I mean, it's not to be hot takey, but like you think through the ways that things could go. Obviously, we both believe there's a variety of ways that things could go. There's a range of outcomes. Different scenarios can exist. But you know, if you wanted to be really accurate, you maybe would just like, because there's been so much health the last couple of years, would just keep things somewhat similar. Anyway, as we look at last year's, there's some of that stuff. There's some of the stuff about like, oh, this guy's on a bad team and some of that. So I'll mention a little bit of that as I work through. But yeah, a lot of it is just straightforward, I think, from last year. So we both had Bowers at 1. You had BTJ at 102. I had him at 106. I went Bowers, Gibbs, Bijan, Chase, Neighbors, BTJ. You went Bowers, BTJ, Chase, Gibbs. You had McBride at 105, which great call. I mean, like to have him that tight with Bowers that he would maybe have a great season and move up. It's fascinating because this is an ADP projection that he had one of the best tight end seasons of all time and is not going anywhere near there.
Second best season last year behind Christian McCaffrey. Outscored all of the other guys. People are like,
who cares?
Don't want an Arizona Cardinal.
Yeah, don't want this player that had the second best season, outscored all these people in tight end premium specifically on a 3-14 team. But Shawn, because his team might go 3-14 this year, again, he can't do what he did on a 3-14 team last year. And then you had Justin Jefferson 106. We both had Jeanty 107. You had Lamb, Neighbors, Puka after that. I had Jefferson. I had Tedrow, McMillan, Lamb, Nico Collins. You had Bijan back at 111. So you had kind of pushed him down a little. TreVeyon Henderson at 12 for you. I also had him at 12. I had McBride at 13. You had London at 13. Nico at 14. I had London at 14. London at 13. Nico at 14 at the 202 and 203. Did I say Nico? I meant Nacua. Puka Nacua. So anyway, we had Nico. We both had Nico, London, Nacua all around the turn. I had McBride way further back than you. We both had Henderson there at the turn, TreVeyon Henderson. And then from there, you had JSN at 204, which I think is an incredible call. I had JSN in the honorable mentions, not even listed here. I was concerned about the overall volume, of course. Shawn, you and I both had Barkley about 203, 204, expecting him to be worse, but still get drafted pretty high. That's basically what happened. You have Xavier Worthy there at 205, McMillan at 206. I had McMillan at 109. I think he's an interesting one because I would argue that he hit in a way that like Brian Thomas did in his rookie year, but the offensive situation meant that he's not a 1-2 turn guy. Kind of, we both saw him. I saw him late first. You saw him mid second. And so he's going in the third this year.
Hit and not be interesting to people is in some way tracks, but it also gets back to both what you're saying about the offense and this element of so many veterans and just so many people overall, and so many veterans stayed healthy that it did create a bit of a ceiling for guys to move up.
Completely. After Barkley, you have RJ Harvey, Omarion, Hampton, which great call there. I had Hampton in my. Oh no, sorry, that's me. Hey, great call, Ben. RJ Harvey, Omarion, Hampton, Devon Achane, Bucky Irving, Amon-Ra, Chase Brown, Ken Walker, Bashal Tootin. So I went with a bunch of running backs in the second round. I remember talking about this last year. I thought running backs were going to move up. Great call there too. Hey, good job, Ben. You went Xavier Worthy McMillan. You had some running backs as well. RJ Harvey, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You had Jaden Daniels up there. Quarterbacks are going higher last year. Obviously, Daniels, Lamar both get hurt. Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, McCaffrey. We both had Chase Brown in the second round. I had Ken Walker in there. You had Ken Walker in the just missed. You had Achane in the just missed as well. But yeah, those, I mean, that's what we did last year. Those are the names. That's some of the considerations. Obviously, like some of the young guys who didn't break out, we know about RJ Harvey and TreVeyon Henderson. We had both those guys in. We were drafting those guys last year as dead zone upside swings.
And Ben, the other thing that I think, when we talked a little bit about McMillan, but I do think it's fascinating when you go and look and you realize that Harvey and Henderson were both in committees and they both scored 200 plus points and are not interesting to people at all this year. And so one of the things kind of fun about the exercise is I think it accurately projected that those guys would score 200 points, right? I mean, that's a very good level for non-first round running backs who were in committees. It also speaks to some of the interesting things that are happening at the running back position and just from, a macro perspective, but it also does get to the very real concerns that Henderson and Harvey now have, even though they scored 200 points. So as opposed to 200 points and now we're off to the races, it's almost like 200 points and now we expect a big step back, which, I don't think either one of us have them projected in the 2027 first or second round. So in our own ways, like we're also,
spoiler alert,
skeptical.
You're gonna find something out. There's a little spoiler interesting thing that's you
good. If you have
my list,
guys in the first two rounds, it has actually just made my day. Ben, one of the things too here, we talk about how no one got hurt last year, and yet the people on the list, right? Brock Bowers, we had him 101. He gets hurt in week 1 and is still going in the middle of the first round. We had Malik Neighbors in our first round. He suffers a catastrophic injury early in the season and is still going in the second round. Jaden Daniels obviously has his season wiped out by injury. That was a huge bummer. Obviously, I think that the person who raises the most eyebrows with people, both in terms of us like being way off and it just being kind of silly in the first place, is Xavier Worthy. But again, he's injured like on the second play of the entire season. And the other guy where I would just say that I got this wrong, but I would be very happy getting it wrong every time, would be the high spot for Brian Thomas. He's one of those guys where I actually think the post-hype thesis right now is pretty fun. I haven't had the courage to take him very often, in part because there are good picks in his range. And I think that as you're building in those first 6 or 7 rounds, you can build such a safe and high upside team that you don't necessarily have to take the swing. But Brian Thomas, with those 2 amazing back-to-back seasons, final year in college, first year as a rookie, he's another player where we tend not to think about it in quite the same way, but injuries may explain most of what happened with him in 2025 as well.
That's so one of the things that you're talking about with him, and you're talking about with Henderson and Harvey being rookies who scored 200 plus points. And I think it's really fascinating from the perspective of this idea of what we're actually looking for in 2020 or looking at in the market in 2026. What happened in 2025? I wrote up a piece about, it was before I did the draft strategy piece. I wrote a piece, I called it Understanding the 2026 Fantasy Football Meta, and over at the newsletter, and talked a lot about what actually happened in 2025, which I think you're getting at, which is that a lot of the top guys stayed healthy and a lot of the top guys scored at a really high level. And then there was a lot of misses in a lot of other places in general. I think people raise the bar for what a hit actually is. I spent a lot of time talking about this concept of whether TreVeyon Henderson was a hit or a miss in that piece, because I had talked about it at the end of last year. It gets back to a thing that I had written about at the end of last year. The great JJ Zachariason there was a disagreement in his Discord, and he had posted a poll on Twitter about whether TreVeyon Henderson was a good, neutral, or bad pick right after he had the huge week 15, before the week 16 concussion, and the rest of his playoffs were bad. And people don't really realize this, but in the 5 games leading up to that, TreVeyon Henderson had been 11 point PPR points or better in every game, and had 2 other games where it was 28 plus. And then he had his third 30, he had a 30-point game, his third boom in like a 6-week window in week 15. And people were still saying this was a bad pick in like round 5 because of how bad he was early in the season. And everyone's just like, you couldn't even have possibly made the playoffs. The argument I made was, if you're saying that's a bad pick, you're saying you can't build around a pick that is supposed to be a late season hammer. And you're saying that 75% or 80% of picks are bad, because most of them.
And I had Henderson into the FFPC main event sprint. So
it was doable.
If you actually get the late scoring.
It's
one of these things where if you get the late scoring on top of actually having those teams windowed a bit early, then arguably even better.
Yeah, for sure. It's a complicated question, and people are probably feeling gaslit that I'm not saying he was a great pick. I'm not saying he was a league winner. I do understand how tough having TreVeyon Henderson was for the first 8 weeks of the season or what have you. The point was that when I think people forget this, when Ramondre Stevenson got hurt, I just saw somebody tweet the other day, because there's this discussion of Ramondre versus Henderson, that it's going to be just like last year when Ramondre was the lead back. Yeah, Ramondre played a lot more, but Henderson got way more touches actually for a long stretch in there. Early on, Henderson lost work, but they were giving Henderson more work on a smaller snap share role over a long stretch, actually, until he had the concussion and Stevenson started performing. If you look at the end of season numbers, now Stevenson missed a little time. Most people would be shocked to know this. TreVeyon Henderson had 180 carries last year. Ramondre Stevenson had 130. He had 50 more carries than Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson did miss time, as I said, but people think the first half TreVeyon Henderson did absolutely nothing, and then kind of forget. I think that anyway. We're not going to make this a Ramondre Stevenson, TreVeyon Henderson show. The point was merely that last year's results, number one, people I think have too high of a bar for what a hit is. And I think they did after last year, because there was so many big hits in the top and people stayed healthy. Sort of just to your point, you're talking about it from a decade-long perspective or more, multi-decades of your experience in fantasy football. And you're saying, I love when a rookie running back in a committee scores 200 plus points that had draft capital and a profile I liked and what that means for their career. That's something you've played throughout your career. When you talked about Brian Thomas just now, you're saying the same thing. When I look at what this guy was and why he maybe struggled in year 2, that's a miss that I want to be in on from a multi-year, multi-decade framework. But I think people are missing that in 2026 because of how unique 2025 was, and because they kind of raised the bar for what a hit is. And they don't realize that when they're saying guys are disappointing, they basically think 75% or 80% of picks were misses last year. If you really sit down and look at it, no, this guy sucked, this guy sucked, this guy sunk my season, this guy sunk my season. And maybe they, to a degree, were. But in terms of like how you can actually win in fantasy, then you need to have the most like contingent-based draft strategy this year, or just upside-based. That was my argument in the thing last year. That would be the biggest excuse ever to lean into the things that we've been talking about in stealing bananas. If you think 75% or 80% of picks are hits, then swing for a league winner on every single pick, always. And probably everyone listening is nodding along because they listen to our show. At any rate, that was what we did in 2025. I want to real quick mention that our 2025 we did a post week 4 check-in. So we got 4 games, and it was way more accurate again, like it kind of always is. You went Puka, Gibbs, Bijan. And then Lamb, Chase, Taylor. I went Gibbs, Bijan, Taylor, Puka, Jefferson, Chase. So I went Jefferson, Chase, Lamb, and you had Jefferson 7. So we had the same top 7. We both had Gibbs as the RB1 and Bijan as the RB2 and Taylor as the RB3. I had CMC RB4. You had him RB5. That's basically what the RB rankings are. And then similar stuff.
And the other sort of interesting note here is that we were both on Jeanty in the first round, even after the slow start.
Yeah, you had him at 108. I had him at 112. We both had Hampton at the 1-2 turn after his start. We both had Achane at the 1-2 turn, which we mentioned preseason. We were a little bit lower on Achane, which is interesting that we were both a little lower on Achane preseason, because we did draft plenty of Achane. I feel like we had our exposure to Achane last year. I guess he was maybe banged up at the time when we did this. I'm kind of remembering that he had a little bit of an injury in August that made it a little tricky to draft him. At any rate, I'm not going to go through our entire week 4 check-in. I just wanted to emphasize it's fascinating to me how quickly by week 4 everything about what was going to happen for the rest of the season had kind of crystallized for us. We had moved Bowers way down. You had him at 110. I had him in the second round. He'd obviously been hurt. You had McBride at 201. I had him at 204. We both had Warren at the back of the first round. Tyler Warren, he had gotten off to a really big start, and so he looked like the stud new tight end. He's not going that high, but he's going in the third round in tight end premium for people who aren't aware of that format. There's a lot of stuff here that quickly and accurately reacted to just the start of the season, the Gibbs Bijan thing, like I said, the Jonathan Taylor rise, having Puka as a wide receiver one, we both had after 4 games, which we both didn't have in the preseason. So we both had BTJ completely out of our first 2 rounds was another one I wanted to mention. That's right. We had him in honorable mention for both of us.
Just, looking at this emphasizes even more is how virtually impossible it felt that the Vikings quarterback play could be as bad as it ended up all season. Because Justin Jefferson, I don't think he's a good pick even like in the middle of the second round at this point, despite having, an upgrade at QB. The Jefferson developments through last season were just shocking. I feel like we've never seen anything like a receiver that good go away so completely. While healthy, right? While healthy.
Which is why I think it's weird that you're so adamant that he's going to go as late as he is. But we'll get to where you have him ranked for next year. I think it was so shocking that he has to rebound. And this is one that you and I have not really seen the same. I'm not super excited about drafting him. I think he's way too talented from a long view perspective to not get a rebound this year.
You don't have him in the 2027 first round.
Okay, I have him right after that, Shawn. I told you everyone from like round pick 6 on was the same for me. All right, this is very challenging. You have him in the back half of the second round if we want to start giving spoilers. All right, let's get started on our 2027 first and second rounds. And what's so fascinating, I said at the top, is there are different ways to parse this for sure this year. You're 101. I have it 109. And that is Jackson Smith-Njigba. Explain to me why he's the 101 in 2027.
Well, JSN was the best receiver in the NFL last year, and I don't think it was even close, right? You have the incredible yards per route run numbers. You have him performing when he doesn't have anyone to draw coverage. You have teams running gimmick defenses against him, and then you see multiple plays in these games where he's run routes that are so extraordinary that despite all of these bracket coverages, he's like 7-8 yards clear of the defense relatively early on in the play, to where Sam Darnold, who is probably about the 23rd or 24th best quarterback in the NFL, is now considered to be decent because he's had 2 back-to-back winning seasons. He wins the Super Bowl, even though he was egregiously awful in the Super Bowl. The Seahawks last year had also, on top of having JSN, had an extraordinary defense that's likely to take at least a small step back. They also had this 1-2 punch of Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Charbonnet actually good enough that he took almost 50% of the work from Kenneth Walker, who is a top 7 or 8 running back in the NFL. Now they have a rookie who, wasn't a great college running back. Now, he may actually be a much better pro than he was in college because of the situation, right? And running in Seattle may end up being fantastic, although I would note that the pre-contact numbers for both Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet were not particularly good, in part because of the line and in part because of how Seattle telegraphed all of those running plays. But you look at the context and you think about JSN and the volume. And I think that there is a strong possibility some of that moves forward, right? So when we think about JSN being, again, I would say clearly the best wide receiver in the NFL and going in the middle of the first round, going behind Puka, going behind Jahmyr Chase, those guys very, very good. If you had them at 1 and 2 for next year, that would be perfectly reasonable. Either of those guys could have a 400-point season. And yet we're basically talking about quarterback questions and volume. The other thing that sort of jumped out to me with the injury study and the things kind of going along with that is that JSN is the cleanest of these guys. And when we think through that portion of it, I think that when you look at talent, you look at potential jump in volume, you look at the limits or the likelihood that some of the really bad scenarios play out. For Puka, obviously you have a different type of superstar. You have someone who, like JSN, gets open everywhere. Someone a little bit different than JSN, who is more of the contested catch guy and then a hammer after the catch. I'd be much more worried about the physical nature of Nacua's game, limiting him in plays. You also have a little bit of the off-field stuff that is disconcerting there, but I do think that it's mostly just some of the elements that we got with the Rams, I think, should move back to the pack. Some of the elements we got with the Seahawks should actually move in a more positive direction. JSN more likely to stay healthy.
There's a player in your, so I'm going to do a little bit of, as I mentioned that JSN was 109 for me. He was my wide receiver 3. Your wide receiver 2 so you have JSN 101. Your wide receiver 2 goes at the 108. Your wide receiver 3 goes at the 111. Then you have another receiver at the 112 and at the 201. But you only have 2 receivers in your top 10 and then 3 straight near the turn. I only have 2 in my top 8. And then I have 2 of those guys at 9, 10. And then I have 3 straight running backs at 11, 12, and 201 where you had your receivers. And my 5 and 6 receivers come in at 202 and 203. It's the same guys, other than I have Jefferson there at 202. We just kind of already alluded to this, and you have him a little further back. I was just going to say there's a receiver you have in the second round we're going to get to later on that I overlooked entirely. So anyway, we've done this before as well. You have done this more than me, but I was late today. I was working on something else. But I remember in past years, you like, oh, I just missed that guy, or adding somebody sometimes. But this is an air ball for me. It's a funny player. I'm just going to name him. It's AJ Brown, because it's the guy you've always said runs with a piano on his back, and I've always liked more. I have AJ Brown, not even in my honorable mentions. We both did a full third round for honorable mentions. You have him in your second round. So I'm giving away a lot of spoilers, but there's a lot here. We both think it's very non-receiver heavy near the top next year, which I think is sort of the top line thing to start with. Oh, I missed a running back too. God, I did this really fast before we came live because I finished an article. Your guy at 106 isn't even on my list because I didn't copy him over anywhere. But we have a lot of running backs early, both of us, and 2 tight ends early. And we're pushing the receivers down quite a ways. As you comment on that structural stuff, I'm going to jam these 2 players in, and TreVeyon Henderson's going to wind up getting bumped out of the second round.
Such a disappointment. Ben had TreVeyon at the 211. The interesting thing with him, and also obviously the interesting element with Harvey, is that they both, on their way to scoring 200 plus points, they flashed the thesis, which is that both of these guys can score through the air. Both of these guys have the talent to create big plays. And in writing about the running back position ahead of last season, those are the 2 things that I emphasized as being the most important. You have to be able to score through the air. You have to have the big play ability. TreVeyon, all of these incredible touchdown runs. And, people can wave some of that stuff away and say, well, it was blocked right. It's like, yeah, but most running backs cannot run through that hole and make the big play. Josh Jacobs can't do it. Bijan Robinson was a better big play guy last year, but he's someone who probably, will not be able to do it. When you're looking at the top of the drafts, you're generally seeing those types of players because it is that important. RJ Harvey, fantastic receiving back, big play, touchdown. But for both guys in camp, they are being hammered by beat writers who were saying the things that kept them off the field last year are showing up as big weaknesses again in this camp. Not being there yourself, it's always that question of, is it really the case, or is it a priming element here where people are so ready to anchor to the mistakes of the past and so ready to say this is a weakness that you are seeking out that weakness to report on? In fairness, we do the opposite, where if a guy makes a nice play, you're like, yeah, see, this is the thesis. This is what we're talking about. I wonder if TreVeyon has been as bad in the areas as the Patriot reports suggest. I guess I don't necessarily wonder as much about RJ Harvey, who supposedly is just much worse than both J.K. Dobbins and Coleman running up the middle. That's probably not the way you wanted to play Harvey, and probably not the way they will.
The TreVeyon, and I've fixed my list now. Apologies to the listeners for my lack of preparation. I will, make sure to punish myself in some way later. Shawn was really on top of it this year. Before we even had a recording time this morning, he had emailed me and was like, round 1, round 2 spoilers. I was like, oh God, he did a bunch of research on this. He took this very seriously. Me with the book launch yesterday and everything, I've been a little bit tied up in the last 24 hours. So my fault on that. I have made some corrections. The TreVeyon case for me was essentially to point it as ADP this year, which everything you're saying is true. There are so many issues with what happened last year. There are so many issues with how this season could go based on the reports, even this year. And yet there's a reason that he's going as high as he is. He was a really intriguing, explosive play profile that was the only running back last year who had 4 runs of 50+ yards. He did a lot of things right. He scored a lot of points. I talked about that a little bit ago. If he's going that high already, I think that's the market telling you that there's a belief that it's not going to be week 1 or the training camp stuff, that it's going to be perfect, but by the end of the season that we're going to see progression forward. This is also an offense that has no third running back like at all. I mean, they have some dudes, whatever. They have guys on the roster, but it's going to be TreVeyon and Stevenson. And the entire thesis with his current ADP is that TreVeyon by the end of the year is going to have established that he is the more dominant player and the better player. And he has a really good profile, explosive play profile. I could see that going into next year, even if he doesn't have an amazing full season this year, and it's more just he hits late, if he cleans that stuff up throughout the year from week 1 through to week 17, because I think that people don't think enough right now. We've always talked about how NFL seasons are chaos and to expect uncertainty and all of those things. I think that's going to be more true in 2026 than ever before. I think that's what we saw in a lot of offenses last year. The Jags receivers is the one that I always come to, where we were talking about Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter, 2 first-round picks as their main guys going into the year. And by midseason, they're trading for Jacoby Myers. And then a 4th guy, Parker Washington's the one that goes off in the second half. And it's completely different than what they really planned to come in. And it's this idea of evolving throughout the year. Same thing with the Rams and the 13 personnel. They didn't do that the first half of the year. They did it when Puka Nacua got banged up and missed a week, and then they limited his snaps coming back. And then everyone was really worried about Devontae Adams as the one receiver in 13 personnel. It was that 13 personnel was their answer to wanting to take Puka Nacua off the field and not overwork him for a stretch of the season, because they're thinking about Super Bowls. They're thinking about, and this is a 17-week season, and that's the way teams are going to evolve in the future going forward, where we're seeing a lot more sub-package use. We're going to see more multi-tight end stuff. We're going to see things shift. Fantasy managers inherently want to draft teams where they're like, that's my locked-in RB1 for the year. That's my locked-in RB2. That's my locked-in wide receiver 1. That's my tight end. I'm ready to go week 1, and it's going to be my team in week 17 when I win the championship. That's not how fantasy football ever worked, and it's definitely not how it works in 2026. And if you have not learned that lesson yet, you really need to get there. My argument with having TreVeyon in the 2-3 turn range for 2027 is that point. It's not about week 1. It's not about what's happening in camp. It's not about September.
The other little bit of nuance that I would throw in with Henderson is that part of what we got last year with Stevenson was actually the Patriots telling us that they didn't think Drake May was very advanced, which seems weird within the context of him almost winning MVP. It feels bizarre and untrue within the context of him maybe having the greatest season, certainly in our memories. I mean, there are probably people who are like, well, I mean, you're forgetting about Dan Marino and John Elway, and those guys played when I was a little kid, but you're not comparing them directly to these players. But in terms of the deep passing, probably the most magical season in terms of accuracy, and then his guys making the catch on the other end, right? The Patriots receivers don't separate, but their ability to have hauled in those passes last year was something that you're not going to see again. With that being the case, and what we saw in the postseason was that May actually has a ton of things that he's not ready for. Well, in year 3, as they firm up some of the things structurally, as you have AJ Brown, as you have Romeo Doubs, as May is ready to actually run the full Josh McDaniels offense, then you can put TreVeyon out there and have that explosive element too. You no longer need to be as conservative and as protective as they maybe needed to be last year with Stevenson.
That's a great point as well. And I just would also emphasize, and I knew when I put TreVeyon there, we'd spend time talking about him. Obviously, a lot of the people are listening. They're like, you've told us one player from your actual first round so far, and we're 40 minutes into the pod. But the other thing I was thinking about with putting TreVeyon there was this point about there's a lot of ways the season can go. I also could see scenarios where TreVeyon's a double-digit round pick next year, where it just really doesn't click again in year 2, and people are really out. The way that they're really out on Xavier Worthy going into year 3, for example, that would not surprise me entirely either. I do see that. But my point is his ADP is going this year as high as it is because people see that, and they also see that he could be a second round pick, late second round pick next year, because it's a wide error band play. I thought he was an interesting one to get in there when I didn't have enough of the other names in the big mix, or the veteran names. I had just straight up forgotten some. I didn't even have him in my 3rd round. The other running back I'll mention was Kenneth Walker. Because it's that pocket at the end of this year's 1st round. I was trying to figure out where to place all those guys, and I somehow deleted Walker and completely forgot about getting him into my list. Anyway, that's why I wound up having room at the back of the 2nd round and for a different tier of player, and I moved in TreVeyon Henderson. You have similar players at the back of your 2nd round, those dead zone-y type backs, a couple year 2 guys. We'll get into which ones, but I had TreVeyon over those guys. I had those guys in my 3rd round. I had TreVeyon over those guys. Part of that was that some of those other guys playing tough offenses, or they have more uncertainty about whether they'd be in committees in a major way next year. TreVeyon, they just don't have as much depth in New England. And Ramondre could still be there. Anyway, let's go back to the 1st round. Let's go back to the top of the 1st round. I have JSN as my wide receiver 3, but at 109. You have Ja'Marr Chase as your wide receiver 3, but at 111. He is my 104. You have Puka Nacua as your wide receiver 5 at 201. So I mentioned you have these 3 receivers at 111, 112, and 201. You have both Chase and Nacua back there. Part of why I didn't have JSN as lofty as you did, although I think you made a great case, and I feel dumb for pushing him all the way to 9. I thought about just keeping him at 5, but part of it was I wanted to get some of these running backs up here, and I do think it's going to be a little more running back heavy near the top next year. And I had Puka at 102, and I had Chase at 104. My argument for Puka at 102, so interestingly, I had Puka at 102, you dropped him to 201. You had Chase at 101. I dropped him to 109. We are seeing those two going different directions. Part of why I dropped JSN down, and this gets to this range of outcomes thing I was just hinting at with TreVeyon, I think you made a very strong case for why JSN could be the 101. I think there's also an argument that in the last several years, these really peak wide receivers, there's a really strong group of 5 or 7 great wide receivers, and these really peak wide receiver seasons are difficult to back up the next year. You mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown being the low-key best receiver over the last 3 years. The stat I have on him is in PPR leagues. He's been exactly the wide receiver 3 all 3 years. No other receiver has been a top 3 receiver twice. So the guys that have finished 1-2 each year have changed every year. It was Lamb and Hill, then it was Jefferson and Chase, and then last year it was Puka and JSN. I don't know if I have the 1-2 organized correctly every year there, but those are the 6 names. And, we obviously still think very highly of those guys. But that point of Lamb 3 years ago, when I accidentally pulled the really old lists, we had Lamb as the 101 going into the year after that 2023 season.
Because he scored 407 points.
He did. He was an absolute superstar. He's been banged up the last couple years. We both have Lamb pretty high this year. in that top 5 receiver range that I've been alluding to, but both in the second half of the first round. We will get there. Superstar, CeeDee Lamb, still a superstar. He was amazing. We had him as like the 101. He had a tough year, and then he's been going in the back half of the first round ever since. Ja'Marr Chase had a tough year coming off that. Jefferson had a tough year. Chase hasn't fallen, but Chase had a tough year, I would say. Last year, he still was awesome, but coming off, he was the 101 last year and wasn't quite worth that, and that's why we see him fall a little bit this year. It is tough to back up the type of elite efficiency. And what the stat on JSN that's absurd is he had 44% of the team's receiving yards. It was the most since the ridiculous Josh Gordon season in 2013. And Gordon was just a fraction better. And like, those are the only two that are at 44% or above in like the Calvin Johnson great seasons were lower 40s. There's only been like 5 or 7 that are over 40% even. So that's like the dominator rating breakout absurd number for colleges. It's not something you do in the NFL. Jason had 44% of the Seahawks receiving yardage last year. That offensive context it could be the reason that his numbers could come down a little bit if he can't consolidate to that degree, which is insane to do.
And if Sam Darnold plays even worse, which is possible.
It's also possible. So then he would be a late first. He would still clearly be in this group. And so anyway, that's why I had him at 109. I want to talk about Puka, who I have at 102. You have at 201. I want to give the positive. I want to hear the negative from you. The positive is that Puka has the kind of outlier usage that I think can sustain in the top 5 over multiple seasons. Both of his last 2 years are among the 3 best targets per route run seasons as far back as my database goes, which I think is the PFF route era, whatever. I think it goes back to, or it's like 2012 or something. Maybe I don't go back as far as they go, but last year I think he was 3rd. And then in 2024, he was actually 1st on that list. These are 35% target per route run type numbers. Now he's missed time. He's banged up, as you said. Those concerns are an issue for me. But I had him ranked over Ja'Marr Chase immediately. I have flipped that. Sorry, this is for my 2026 like Stealing Signal subscriber rankings. I have flipped that because of some of the off-field stuff you mentioned, and because there was like vague rumors of suspension risk for Puka as well. And I don't know if that's been resolved. So I'm debating when I'm going to flip that back. But for a stretch there, I was like, I can't really justify taking him over Chase against ADP if there's both some minor health things in camp and the suspension risk. But if Puka plays 17 games, I think he should be the wide receiver 1 this year. And I think he should be because the other side of the coin is the other receiver on that offense is Davante Adams, whose numbers cratered last year. People are still drafting him incredibly high because he had 14 touchdowns. Everything from a like a per route basis and all of that, very, very poor. Some of that is, he got a lot of really short area targets, so you can't get a lot of yards when you catch 14 1-yard touchdowns, but it's worse than just that. And then the other key thing is what the team told you in the offseason, which is they tried to trade him. They told him, they made it publicly available. It was known information. If you're not kind of factoring that in and that's something you don't remember, they talked to Davante Adams. They gave him the veteran respect and they talked to his agent. And it got out and it was very publicly known they wanted to move on from Adams. It sounded like they didn't find a suitor. They were very much in on A.J. Brown. Then the discussion became that they had an issue with A.J. Brown's knee and the longevity. But parsing that, they were at the situation that they were at, I think, the year before they actually did get rid of Cooper Kupp, where they were like, Cooper Kupp's not the same guy anymore. Because there was already some rumors they wanted to move on from Cooper Kupp a year prior. They do a lot of like advanced tracking on stuff. They were not comfortable with Kupp's speed and quick twitch stuff and breaks with the hamstrings and how that was breaking down over the years. I think they know that Davante Adams is done and they wanted to move on. I think he's about
done
to have
the previous season. Why did they sign him to so much money if they're so forward looking? That's the part that's weird to me.
That is weird. Also, everything you've been hearing about Terrence Ferguson all offseason ties in here as well. But I think the Ferguson thing's going to hit, John. Like they've been talking about him a ton, and every fantasy analyst loves it. So there's no point trying to hide his ADP rise at this point. He's going in the 10th round in FFPC drafts right now. If you're in a home league listening to this, take Terrence Ferguson in your last round because there's a lot of smoke there, and where there's smoke, there's often fire. My point about Puka, if he stays healthy, if he doesn't get suspended, if he's on the field, that really high targets per route, they're going to use the tight ends. They're going to use Ferguson. They're going to do different stuff. Adams had a ton of air yards last year. They're not going to be able to do as much with Adams. And Puka, while he was on the field last year, was the best statistical. I agree with you that JSN was the best receiver. Puka was the best statistical receiver per game, which is why a lot of people said he should win Offensive Player of the Year. which was absurd in my opinion. You had the MVP as your quarterback, and JSN was doing what he did despite Sam Darnold. So you had, there's a very different context, and JSN rightfully won Offensive Player of the Year, but people were looking at just the numbers, not contextualizing. Well, in fantasy, all we care about is the numbers. We don't care about who should win Offensive Player of the Year. I think Puka Nacua has the potential to be even better this year if Davante Adams is worse, if they have to use him more in the red zone. It's why I've gotten a little bit intrigued by your Blake Corum optimism, because I don't think they can just – I think they'll still throw a lot to Adams close because they want to get something out of him. So he may still catch 8 or 10 touchdowns. I think it's going to come down. It's going to make him a huge bust in fantasy without 14 TDs. Puka, I think, could score a little bit more as a result, and the running backs could score a little more. But I also think Puka could consolidate. I don't want to say volume even more, but the volume can get really nutty when you look at the way that his per route stuff can be, and his ceiling from a compilation of yardage. And what we've seen from him over multiple years is and from Cup prior, even though defense is obviously game plan for this stuff, the McVay system still allows you to get the ball to this player, and Nacua is very good at it. They'll do it a lot of different ways. They'll do it at the line of scrimmage. They'll do it vertically. He was really good playing the ball deep last year as well. He's a superstar, and I think he's going to have potentially a fantastic season if he stays healthy in a way that makes him the clear wide receiver 1 next year.
Yeah, some things have to work against him for him to not be spectacular. You know that I'm not one of these, like, let's regress all the numbers, let's regress the touchdowns, let's do this and that to the players. I believe in chasing touchdowns, all of that type of thing. I do think that when we're looking at the Rams, we have to be a little bit careful about just how unlikely last year's season was. Matthew Stafford has 10 seasons with 4,000 plus yards. His season last year with 4,700, not even really that close to his best, although the two of the massive ones in 2011, 2012, obviously you're talking about Calvin Johnson, and you're talking about a very different environment, even though those are 16-game seasons. He has 3 seasons with 40-plus touchdowns, which in its own right is extraordinary. But the weird thing is he has only one other season with even 30. The likelihood in the 2 seasons previous with the Rams and very good offenses, 20 and 24. Right, the potential for the Rams to absolutely collapse in passing touchdowns is very real. One of the things that I looked at with this, because you had all of these short yardage touchdowns to Davante Adams, was whether or not they had completely changed what they did around the goal line. And the answer was that they actually hadn't. Things just got skewed very much to the touchdowns being scored on the passing plays. Now, there is a way in which if you have Davante Adams and you have Puka Nacua, that could easily be something that happens again. I guess I would be concerned that it might happen again for Davante Adams almost because that's the only thing he does well. And I mean, I've made the argument they don't have to, especially when they've been clear that they don't think Adams is that good, they don't have to justify his contract again this season. But if he is going to be someone who plays all the time, they might still feel like they need to justify having him out there and using him in that way. The Puka Nacua 10 touchdowns is actually something that I would expect to come down, or I think there's a very real chance that it could come down dramatically, even if he's healthy. And then I do think he's one of the most likely receivers to get hurt.
Fair reasons to have him at 201 on the concern side. So I start Gibbs, Puka, Bowers is my 103. He's your 103 as well. Chase, Bijan. I've got Jeanty at 6 and Hampton at 7. You start Jackson Smith and Jigba, Gibbs 2. So I have Gibbs 101. You have him 102. I don't know if we're going to spend a ton of time on Gibbs because we're spending some time on the disagreements, which I think are really interesting. You have Bowers. Well, so I guess I do kind of want to talk about Gibbs at 102 for you, but we'll get there in a sec. Because I think Gibbs is going to have the 101 season. Like, this is going to be the Gibbs season like we haven't had. I've compared it a little bit more like the OOs, which I know you're very obviously familiar with. One of the things I love about you is you've been playing fantasy for a very long time, as have I. There was a stretch in there where if you didn't have the 101 and you didn't have LaDainian Tomlinson, you didn't win. You didn't have Priest Holmes that year, you didn't win. If you didn't have Marshall Faulk even prior, you didn't win. You just lost. And it was like, this guy drew the 101, and you're just mad at your. That's why all of us who had home leagues back then started lottos and stuff about how to get draft order, because getting the 101 used to, and then it's been a curse for the last 10 years. The 101 has been poor, but if you go back a decade plus, 2 decades now, Jahmyr Gibbs at 101 this year is going to be that season. It's the Jahmyr Gibbs
It's
season.
actually one of the reasons that auctions became pretty popular, because the person who, and if there were a couple guys, right, if you're thinking about Marshall Faulk, if you're thinking about Priest Holmes, the people who had access to Tomlinson, Holmes, Faulk, they needed to pay more than the top 3 picks, especially if you're not going to do third round reversal. I mean, they needed to pay double what everyone else was paying for their first round picks.
So why do you have Gibbs at 102? You don't see that.
The touch mix should be very good. One of the things that was, I think, bizarre in a way that is almost certainly untrue is that the injury studies suggested that historically receptions for running backs have conferred no injury risk whatsoever. Now, you know that obviously when you have the ball in your hands and you're being tackled on an NFL field, that there's some risk of an injury there. I think that at the same time that we have to understand that when you have a guy who has just gone 360 and 370 in scoring with a David Montgomery on the same team, that the potential for that Marshall Faulk season with 400 plus is really strong. And yet, and again, I mean, it's this weird element where running backs have just become, it really has flipped. I mean, they've become the safe play. Jahmyr Gibbs has not had injury concerns, played 17 games back-to-back seasons. I think that mostly
who has an
what
injury
happens,
issue right now? His backup has an injury issue right now. He's not coming off the field ever.
There's no backup. Like any play to Isaiah Pacheco is just asking to lose games. The mix for Detroit when David Montgomery was hurt a couple of years ago made them an unstoppable juggernaut that was the best team in the NFL. It was really sad that they choked the playoff game. They obviously don't have Ben Johnson anymore. And yet, I don't know. I've knocked Amon-Ra down as well, which having both of those things together doesn't make sense. But the Detroit Lions, I mean, so many of these plays are going to flow to the player who shall not be named. And that's where I would look for an exploitable opportunity in the Detroit Lions offense.
Well, the player that shall not be named is going to get named in my second round, but he's not going to get named in your second or your third round, which is interesting. You do have Amon-Ra in a very interesting spot, as you alluded to. We'll get there. You got the Lions underrepresented in your first couple rounds, I will say, from my perspective, of how concentrated that I think that offense will be and how good we know that they are offensively. JSN Gibbs, you had Bowers 103. I mentioned we both have Bowers 3. One of my big thoughts on Bowers was, will he go that high in tight end premium? We've done this before. We've had him as high as 101, and we've overprojected it. And one of the things that happens is people go, well, I can play tight end on the way back. I can play in the 2-3 turn. There's 4 good tight ends. What I will say about the way that you and I both rank these tight ends, we don't just think Bowers is going to be good. And if you look at our history of ranking these tight ends, we've probably overranked tight ends in the tight end premium format when we've done this exercise. Having said that, you and I both have all 4 of the top tight ends in the top, 19 picks. I have Warren at 207. That is later than you have Warren. You have him at 205. And we both have Loveland and McBride in between Bowers and there. So we're both saying that the way the ADP is going to shake out in tight end premium next year is if you don't take Bowers at 103 or in the top 3 picks, you won't have access to any of these elite tight ends who are going to be going to the back half drafters at the 1 or 2 coming back for the most part. And so anyway, structurally.
My question for you would be, in the last 3 seasons, the players who have scored more points than Trey McBride did last year are the 400-point CeeDee Lamb season that we talked about, 2 seasons from Christian McCaffrey, and then you have the 400-point season from Jahmyr Chase in 2024.
That's it.
Right. That's it. And so if you make the case that, and then Tyreek Hill also in there in 2023, edging him, or basically scoring the exact same number of points. If you make the case that Brock Bowers is this year's JSN because of the similarities with the offensive stuff and what have you, and because he's such an immense talent, if you believe that he's going to have a better season than Trey McBride last year, I mean, the scoring levels are such that almost no one can touch him. It has to be something where you would think going forward in 2027 that a Jahmyr Gibbs, still with the running back version of that, is easier to sustain because you can just hand the ball to Jahmyr Gibbs, and because there are these other weapons that in a 2027 season, defenses could say, let's figure out how to stop Brock Bowers. And I guess I could understand that. But again, from a pure points perspective, the tight end ability, like a superstar tight end, you think about Brock Bowers, if you think he's better than Trey McBride or similar, if you think he's better than Travis Kelce, and I don't think there's any question. I mean, there's no question in my mind. It's probably just not remotely fair. But I mean, we're talking about a very different type of player than Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce, the most undervalued player in fantasy football for like a 7-year period. Are people going to be as skeptical of Brock Bowers as they were of Travis Kelce? I think that some people weren't skeptical of Travis Kelce. He was going in the first round. He was not going as early in the first round as he should have gone.
That is the big question. That's why I was talking about it that way. It's not about whether Bowers deserves to go here. It's about the fact that we have traditionally felt that the market would understand tight ends differently than the market tends to. And so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. That's the part of this exercise where we're trying to predict the market that gets really tricky. We're not trying to say what our rankings are going to be, who we think it deserves to go where. We're trying to say what we think the ADP is going to be. We did still both put Bowers at 103. It sounds like you were having the same internal debates as me. Part of it for me was it does feel really flat, man. Like Gibbs was the only one that I felt like I almost put Bowers 102. Gibbs was the only one I felt like I definitely wanted to have ahead of him. And then I mentioned the reasons I had Puka that high, and you gave good case for why JSN can be so unique. But I think we both are saying to some degree, there's a lot of options for things at other positions at that point.
So for me, though, I will say that there's a tier break after Brock Bowers.
Yeah. That's kind of how I felt too.
The three superstars, the three positions, JSN, Jahmyr Gibbs, Brock Bowers for me. And then it gets flat and interesting.
That's how I felt about it too. But that's my point, I think, of why we both put Bowers where we did. And I think that's why drafters may actually draft him that high if he has the season we're talking about. Because they may decide the player that I can't get anywhere else is Brock Bowers, but I can get my other builds with different stuff. You know, they're similar to the guys who's going 104. He's similar to the guy going 109. But Brock Bowers is Brock Bowers, and I have to make sure to get Brock Bowers. So anyway, we have Brock Bowers both at 103. I mentioned my top 7. I had Gibbs, Puka, Bowers, Chase. You have Puka and Chase later. Bijan, Jeanty, Hampton. Jeanty and Hampton are going to come up in your top 7. Bijan is not, and I'm going to pass it to you in a second. JSN, Gibbs, Bowers were your top 3. People are like, Ben, you have not told us Shawn's 4th player, and we're over an hour in. All I want to know is what Shawn Siegele thinks about next year. I get it. I'm getting there. Ashton, Jeanty is the 104. Omarion, Hampton is the 105. So I had these guys 6-7 as my RB3-4. You had them 4-5 as your RB2-3. Then you had Kenneth Walker 6. That's the one that I completely omitted. Hilariously, I threw him back at the 1-2 turn when I made an adjustment a little bit ago on the earlier, the first hour of the show. And then at 7, you have Trey McBride. At 8, I have Colston Loveland. That is our tight end 2. I pushed McBride into round 2. You pushed Loveland into round 2. I think Loveland could be really dynamic, and I'll talk about him in a minute. I also think with the McBride point, he already had the best season of all time last year, and they're drafting him with the 1-2 turn. So I don't know what he's got to do this year to get up to 107 for you. But you got him at 1. You got him rising next year, despite what he did last year. I don't know. Drafters hate Trey McBride is my logic for putting him in the second round. And then you have Lamb 108. I have Lamb 10. You have Jeremiah Love 109. I have Love 11. So it's interesting. I have Jeanty 6'7", Hampton 6'7". You have Jeanty 4'5". I have Lamb Love 10-11. You have them 8-9. And then a part of that is because you at 10-11 have Bijan Robinson and then Jahmyr Chase, who I obviously mentioned I have at 4 and 5. So we actually see the Jeanty Hampton thing very similarly, and we see the Lamb Love sort of being back first round guys similarly. I would argue we have a different tight end too that mixes in here. I have JSN sneaking in there. You have Kenneth Walker sneaking in there, and then we have a difference in the front of JSN versus Puka. You have Puka back at the 1-2 turn. I have Ken Walker back at the 1-2 turn. But I always try to kind of draw parallels between what we have similar. This is a very different first round for both of us. Usually there are more similarities, but that's how I see it as being similar in my little pattern matching brain. Is the Jeanty Hampton thing I think is similar. I think the Lamb Love thing is similar. I think what's pushing them down is you have Bijan and Chase back at 10 and 11. And I want to talk about that. Well, I want to talk about both of them. I guess pick one, or what do you think about? I mean, I moved Bijan to 5, and I felt like that might be low. You did talk at the top about we don't just want to do it exactly the same as ADP last year, but I still have Bijan as my RB2. I did have a hard time putting Jeanty ahead of him. I had a hard time putting Hampton ahead of him. Had a hard time putting Love ahead of him. I have them RB3, 4, 5. You go Gibbs, and then you go Jeanty, Hampton. You have Ken Walker 5, and then Love 6. Bijan is your RB7. He's still at 10 overall. You have Love 5. You have Bijan 6. He's your RB6 overall at 10. He's your RB6. He is your 10th overall pick. You have 6 running backs in the top 10. I mentioned this earlier. And so it's not like you're pushing Bijan completely way down. You're saying that some other running backs are really interesting and may rise. But I want to hear about that Bijan thing. I also want to hear, as I pass this back to you, how you felt about putting Jeanty at 4. Part of the reason I have him at 6 and I kept chasing Bijan and those guys up is Brock Bowers at 3. I talked about this earlier. Like, what do you do with the Raiders? I mean, we're putting a lot of faith in Clint Kubiak, and I was happy to, actually. I was like, you know what? Clint Kubiak's pretty sweet. Maybe it's possible, man. Maybe it is possible that they're going to have 2 top 6 picks next year. Bowers is going to be the 3rd. Jeanty is going to be the 6th. You're one-upping me there. You're saying they're going to have the number 3 overall and the number 4 overall players are going to be Las Vegas Raiders this time next year. That stands out to me. So I'm going to kick it to you for, hopefully you have like 15 minutes in you, because I want to hear about that. I want to hear about Bijan. I want to hear about Chase. And anything else you want to tell us about Omarion, Hampton, Ken Walker, any of these other guys?
So I think just straightforwardly, the main thing with Robinson and Chase is that it's more a statement about the guys ahead of them than any sort of certainly extreme skepticism about Robinson and Chase. And partly it's putting them there in order to sort of facilitate conversation. But in terms of the actual weaknesses, it would be skepticism that Robinson separates in quite the same way that he has. When you think about last year, he was a better big play guy. I'm not sure that continues to be the case when he really is someone who is slightly less dynamic in a straight line than a lot of the other stars. Now, his lateral agility for a big back is otherworldly. I'm skeptical that he'll catch as many passes when they now don't have Algier and probably are thinking most teams are going to be thinking a little more conventionally, right? And so you move a little bit more of his work into the running game. You have someone like Zachariah Branch who can do some of the things that he did as a receiver. You have the coaching change, which when you've scored as many points as Robinson already has, that can be nothing but a problem. Now, it doesn't have to be a problem, but it can be a problem in terms of how the lack of continuity sets you back a little bit. And then we're talking about a team that probably won't score many points. The Falcons are trying to decide between 2 bad quarterbacks who have injuries. When you have 2 bad injured quarterbacks and you're trying to decide between them, again, it's not that they're going to be a complete train wreck, but the Falcons are probably not going to be one of the top scoring teams in the NFL.
Just to jump in here, I saw a beat report from another team. I can't remember who they're doing the joint practices with, but they were talking about players on another team. And then he just threw in on it was a social media post, but he threw it on the end of his post. Also, Tua Tagovailoa had a horrible practice. It was just like, this guy's terrible. Just wanted to let everyone know. He's like, I don't even cover the Falcons, but this guy was horrible all practice. So it's not great at the quarterback position there.
So if you do believe in some of these other guys in the first round, then you could see your way to Robinson dropping. One of the things is when someone's been as good as Robinson and is still kind of in that peak age range, we tend to think of them as being just so locked in. And yet you don't have to go very far back to the David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon time period to find situations in which guys did fall off pretty quickly. And then when you think about the current situation and the extreme talent of Jeanty, Hampton, and Jeremiah Love, when you think about what Kenneth Walker did last year in the playoffs and now playing in a Chiefs offense where they have nothing except for him, I do think that we're talking about big enough talents that if things hit in a really pretty straightforward way, then if Robinson has these structural things working against him, that he could be pushed down, even if he remains Bijan Robinson, who is just an extraordinary player.
What about the Jeanty Bowers 2 Raiders thing?
Well, one of the things that Kubiak does that's pretty fun is he creates. I mean, he's one of these guys who does seem to know what he's doing within the context of the current NFL. And if we're talking about, I mean, you've done a ton of work and explained to listeners and readers about the youth movement in the offensive coordinator positions across the league. And I've got a ton of optimism that will mean exciting things for football this year. The football will be more fun. But you think about what he did, to an extent with the Saints, what he did last year with the Seahawks, making it possible for JSN to thrive, even though he was the only guy there. The Raiders have a really weird wide receiver depth chart where, I mean, we're in round 15, 16, 17, whatever it is, of the Apex Experts draft, and the Raiders wide receiver 1 has not been picked. So you think about where Trey Tucker is, you think about what Jalen Naylor is. Ben, this has been an incredibly exciting offseason for the RotoViz rookie guide and the RotoViz dynasty recommendations from sort of draft weekend, where we were all in on Stribling, all in on Jacoby Lane, but then another guy sort of under the radar where I'm like, this could be not really the Puka Nacua because that's just so unrealistic, but the guy who's drafted at the very end and yet seems like he could factor in right away was Malik Benson. And Malik Benson has also had one of these camps that has been really good. Now, does that mean that he's going to actually gain yardage and score points in 2026 for the Raiders? I mean, probably not. But when you have 3 speed receivers, all of whom bring something a little bit different, and at the very least can play enough to drive defenses off the ball, and you know that your coordinator is going to run these guys vertically and is not going to just do that, but is going to do it in ways that are interesting, right? In ways that actually do stress the defense in 2026, to be able to come back and get the ball underneath relentlessly to Brock Bowers and Ashton Jeanty, because you have these 3 vertical receivers that you've established and that defenses actually have to account for, even if their own volume is going to be minimal. I think that's a little bit of an under the radar point of excitement for the Raiders. It's so easy to focus on the 2 main guys, the lack of an alpha receiver, the fact that you're going to have Kirk Cousins and then go to Mendoza. I think this Tucker Naylor Benson thing is real and fun. And while they're not fantasy relevant, it does actually unlock the other guys.
I like that. We got, I mentioned your top. I just realized I had another player not accounted for in my list. This is absurd. I should have done more checks and balances. I think I was so intent on not checking your list before we started recording. I think in the past I've actually glanced over yours a little bit to come to some ideas and then mentioned to either you or me if we had kind of forgotten somebody. It's kind of hard. But the one I missed this time was Breece Hall, who is, I think I'm really excited about him, and I don't know how I missed. Yeah, I think that the Jet stuff is weird. He's never had more than 6 rushing TDs in a season. He's had 1,350 yards all 3 of his healthy seasons the last 3 years. He's a superstar. He just puts up massive yardage numbers, but has not been able to get enough touchdowns. And everyone's like, well, he plays for the Jets, so he can't ever be good. And like one of these years, he's going to be meaningfully better for fantasy scoring than he's been up to this point because he will score touchdowns. The one year he got like 4 receiving TDs, and that was why he was so good. And so he had like 9 total, but he hasn't even had a double-digit touchdown season, which he's Breece Hall. So anyway, we'll get to him. I actually ended up putting him ahead of Walker as I just went and made my little adjustments. Can't stand by any of the things that I've done. It's giant asterisks across my board. But your first round, I mentioned JSN, Gibbs, Bowers, Jeanty, Hampton, Walker, McBride, Lamb, Love, Bijan Robinson, Chase, and your 12 is Malik Neighbors. I really wanted to get him in the first round, but he keeps moving down. He's at my 205 now because I have to keep putting people in that I forgot at the 1-2 turn. But Neighbors is your wide receiver 4 ahead of Puka Nacua, your wide receiver 5. I get Neighbors to wide receiver 6 here behind Justin Jefferson still. I didn't really love that having Neighbors behind Jefferson, but I also didn't love pushing Jefferson down. I guess I'm not surprised that you have Jefferson a little bit further down because of the question of like, okay, we're basically pushing all the wide receivers down. And then it's a question of, okay, which of the really good wide receivers actually belongs in the first round? If we're both only going to have 4, you get Chase Neighbors at the end at 11 and 12. I went Gibbs, Puka, Bowers, Chase, Bijan, Jeanty, Hampton, as I mentioned. Then I had Loveland at 8, JSN 9, Lamb 10, Love, and JT 11 and 12. You have JT 202. So we both have Jonathan Taylor at the 1-2 turn. I think he's a really good pick in the middle of the first round. I thought that was interesting that I wound up putting him back to the 1-2 turn. I didn't necessarily want to do that. He's another one of these guys that when I was at like 6 where I put Jeanty, I was like, I want to put JT there too. And I want to put Jeanty and I want to put Hampton there. And I want to put JSN there. And I want to put Lamb there. And I want to put Neighbors all the way up there. All of these guys. But Taylor's one that, probably listeners can understand. Like he's a massively interesting player. The fascinating thing is that he was way better than every other running back not named Christian McCaffrey when Daniel Jones went down. He was a 25 point per game player, hitting on explosive runs like crazy, and had added the receiving this year, which has always been the limitation. 3rd in the NFL in running back routes last year, over 400 by PFF's numbers, had never been over 300. He was like 50% higher in routes. He was like a 280 peak, and now he goes over 400. He adds 140 routes to his total. No one's reacting to that, and I think it's always tricky to project that forward with Taylor, in part because people have seen him play. And one of the arguments that I always made to people with him, and I made to you back, several years ago when I liked him at 101, and you're like, it's not going to catch enough passes for it, is that he is used in the passing game and he is viable. He's not Adrian Peterson when it comes to receiving. At the same time, he's also not one of these guys who's ever going to fully have that as the thing that they do well. He's awkward with it. He's in that middle, right? Where he's not Adrian Peterson. He does catch passes. He's such a big play guy that you're like, yeah, if we can get him on the edge, like let's throw him some passes because those could be 80-yard touchdowns. But the lack of intuitiveness with it is always going to cap him in terms of pure receptions at a level that makes it tricky to take forward to the next year. And I say that just absolutely loving him. Jonathan Taylor is still, it's probably the wrong time to bring it up, but one of the reasons that it made my mind explode at the time, and that I will just never get over the Chiefs passing on him for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, is that Jonathan Taylor is my favorite running back prospect ever. And, so I say it from a place of deep love that I don't think he can be the type of receiver that, the people feel comfortable in the top couple of picks. And then if it's as crowded as it appears to be to us, and he's a year older, and you have Daniel Jones and you have all of the Colts weirdness, maybe the Colts weirdness clears up. The way that he could be like a clear 104 is if the Colts made like the AFC Championship game. And I don't think that that's out of the equation either, or out of the question either. Yeah. Their offense going into their bye, and everyone says, oh, well, their schedule got harder out of the bye and this and that. It's kind of funny because no one's knocking like the Patriots for the fact that they played 4 tough defenses in the postseason and had horrible offensive results. But everyone says this stat that the Colts were the product of their first half schedule, and then it was getting worse when Daniel Jones got hurt. They had 2 games, and one of them was against the Texans, who have like literally, I mean, same thing. The Patriots struggled against the Texans in the postseason. They played the same team. The other one was against the Chiefs, I believe. And then the third game, Daniel Jones tore his Achilles in the first quarter. And it's like, all right, well, I mean, we saw like a couple bad games coming out of the bye. Going into the bye, they had played 10 games. Go look at every, like, to control for buys, go look at every team's first 10 games, not just through week 10. They had the most total yardage of an offense of all 32 offenses in the NFL. They were the best offense through a team's first 10 games, not just through 10 weeks. Any team who had an earlier bye, give them their week 11. Go 10 games. Colts, number 1. So anyway, your idea that they could be an AFC Championship team if their quarterback stays healthy. Steichen is a good coach. They got talent. I think they did a really good job last year, and I don't think they get enough credit because the end of the season with Phillip Rivers was so weird. I think that's possible, and I think Jonathan Taylor's a superstar too. And it's funny because the way that you said that is it makes sense that he could be going at the 1-2 turn and why we kind of both landed there. And it's also like, we're still saying he's a good pick in the middle of the first round this year. We're not saying he's not. I mean, there's a lot of ways that can be a superstar season. I agree with you. I don't think his receiving is going to be anywhere close to the other 3 stars. The problem is he could run for more yards than all of them by a lot, potentially. I mean, he could run for 2,200 yards. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he's a superstar rushing prospect. He's what Barkley, he's younger version of what Barkley did 2 years ago, right? I mean, that's what you're thinking in terms of what he can be as a rusher and an explosive play guy. Go look at his career rushing efficiency. It's absurd. And he's been in some bad offenses. If this is a good offense, like it was early last year, he was hitting explosive runs left and right. His yards per carry were through the roof. They came down massively at the end of the year with Phillip Rivers because you don't have any threat to defenses. And everyone's like, oh yeah, we're going to do everything we can to stop the best player on the field, which is Jonathan Taylor. If you can make them respect anything else, Jonathan Taylor is going to make explosive plays. So anyway, we have him back at the 1-2 turn, and I agree with you about the receiving stuff, and that's why. Is there anyone else? I want to have the tight end discussion. Is there anyone else I blew through too quick that you think the listeners will want to hear? Because I did kind of go through that a little bit weird this time around. Love, you have him at 109. I have him at 111. I think people probably understand that. We think he's a superstar prospect. We also think it's a tough offense. Like, he's got an injury now going into the year. Maybe that will linger a little and impact his first year. A late first-round pick going into next year makes some sense. Hampton, we didn't really talk about. You have him 105. I have him 107. I think it's kind of straightforward too, though. I mean, I think in some ways it's similar to the BTJ pick from before and from last year. And I would make the case that the reason listeners love this show so much is the first few years we did this, those picks were hitting every time. We were actually like really accurate on that stuff. You had some great calls. I can't remember who, but the first couple of years you had some incredible calls. The next year, that's why we started reviewing it. We were like, look at how good we did. Like it was really good. And I think people will remember that who have listened to this every year. They'll basically remember that, like, yeah, this was an exercise that had value because we were finding players to talk about that. Then the next year we're going up there, and it was very interesting. And that's why people were tuning in and cared. Maybe we didn't hit on those guys last year with like the BTJ type example. The thing I would argue is you can't hit on that player every time you play it. That's the point. You're trying to win your league. When you do hit on it, you're one of 12 teams. You make these, these big wide air band type of high upside swings. There's no expectation that you're going to hit on them every single time. At any rate, I think Hampton is maybe that player for us this year where people probably have a hard time seeing it. And yet we both do from the perspective that this is an offense that could take a huge step forward. It's a great prospect, very talented player. It's really easy for me to see how he could score in ways that I can't see right now. I can't tell you exactly what his stat line is, but he's the star of this offense.
And so I think the really strong counter argument is just that when you pick out examples of how it could work, those tend to be niche examples or they're very unsustainable examples. But even though that stuff is true, I think it's still kind of the wrong way to look at it, right? When we talk about how, and for me with say J.K. Dobbins, I think that J.K. Dobbins is maybe the best interior runner in football, but it's devastating for him. The Coleman is so good. And then you're starting to look at, well, with 3 backs together, how do they hit? And for me, it's like, well, the Kamara or the Sproles or that type of player, basically the Harvey is the one who historically can still score in a way that at those prices, it's pretty compelling. The thing with Hampton, for example, is just you think of a couple years ago where Raheem Mostert was the RB3 in points per game and Achane was the RB5. Now, partly that happens because both players missed some time. It would have been difficult for them to each play 17 games and for that to be the case. And immediately that took a step back the following season. But partly because the Dolphins were far less talented than what this Chargers team is. And so if you think about a scenario where, let's say Hampton is the RB3 in points per game and Keaton Mitchell is the RB5. Hampton is not Raheem Mostert. And Keaton Mitchell is probably not Achane or doesn't really have the path to becoming the guy in the way that Achane obviously was going to. Right. So, there are just so many different ways, and it doesn't even have to be that. Hampton is going in the middle of the second round. Say he's the RB10 and Keaton Mitchell is the RB20. And then you look forward to the next season where Hampton is young, he's huge, he's got blazing speed, he is a plus receiver, and he's got the best offensive coordinator in the NFL with a plus offensive line and one of the NFL's best quarterbacks, a quarterback who has had kind of a checkered existence in the NFL, but yet where a legendary head coach is saying, if I don't get him into the Hall of Fame, I will have failed as a head coach. This is very different than Raheem Mostert and Tua Tagovailoa, right? You're setting up for a 5 or 6 year period where these guys simply score a ton of points. And I don't think you have to be overly precise in figuring out when those points come, especially when you're thinking about playoff upside for winning $1 million or playoff upside for beating your family members in your home league. It's one of those types of plays too, where if you are concerned at all about running back injuries, the fact that Omarion Hampton can be RB5 with far fewer touches than the guys around him, you have, again, a little bit additional safety in that play, which is helpful for him because he did actually have injuries last year.
Two things, something I want to emphasize there and something I want to push back on very slightly. The point you made about Mostert and Achane. Mostert had the 20 TD season. Achane had 11, I believe. I think there was one other running back TD. If I'm remembering all this from memory, they had 32 running back touchdowns. That was the 2022 season in Mike McDaniel's Miami Dolphins offense. Maybe it's got to be 2022. Sounds right. I don't know. One of those years, 2021 to 2023, something in there. So that's, what you were explicitly referencing for anyone who's not following that. And it was a scenario where like Hill and Waddle were good, or maybe it was even pre-Hill. I can't remember exactly, but the running backs were so productive. Obviously the drivers of like those guys were good in the pass game as well, but were able to score a massive number of points. The minor little pushback was if Mike McDaniel does that, he's not going to be the best offensive coordinator in the league next year. He's going to be a head coach again because he had head coaching interviews this offseason. He took the coordinator job. It seemed like he wanted to do something really fun. If they have a monster season, he's going to get a bag thrown at him.
If they put the template in place, the blueprint in place, and Harbaugh has demonstrated the willingness to sort of put his own ego to the side and say, we're going to have one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL. I guess I would have optimism that if McDaniel leaves, maybe you don't have him and he may be unique in a way that is hard to match, but you're going to stay aggressive. You're going to stay young. You're going to stay creative. You're going to stay in this mindset of we're going to score the most points in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Loveland, I had him at 108. You have him at 203. The Bears offense is going to be very concentrated this year. I think I've given the take enough that people probably are well aware of it, but Burden, Adunze, Loveland, I think are going to consolidate a lot of volume. I projected them all for over 100 targets and no one else for over 50. Their wide receiver 3 is probably Khalif Raymond, or the rookie Xavier Thomas are going to do some creative stuff with. Their backs are going to split. So they were, I think, in the 40s in targets or whatever. And then you have the fact that with the pick of Sam Roush, who was actually a pretty strong prospect, all things considered.
A really interesting prospect.
Yeah, a really interesting prospect, but he's their tight end 3. They took him on day 2, and you already have Cole Kmet. They're a lock to play more tight ends. This is like, there's been a lot of this talk. This is one of the offenses that's going to for sure. And Loveland is my, the cleanest way to play this in my mind. When people talk about the two tight end sets, they talk about how the wide receivers can consolidate more. They can. So can a tight end like Loveland. It means that he's also running routes against other tight ends that are not, being used very effectively for receiving stuff. Loveland's late season production was absurd last year. He was a 21-year-old rookie, closed the season insanely well. 22-year-old who also, by the way, had really productive per route numbers. Like, he didn't run a lot of routes at Michigan based on how they do things. Really productive per route numbers with a quarterback that we now know is terrible in J.J. McCarthy. And then the funny thing was everyone was saying the quarterbacks after McCarthy were even worse because Loveland was a year behind, and that's why Loveland's production his last season went down. But he basically played with nobody in college, and he got to play with a decent quarterback last year in a good offense of Ben Johnson's, and he went off down the stretch. If you go look at his game logs from week 16-ish through the postseason, he got concussed in the final game, but 80+% routes, 4 straight games, 10+ targets 3 times, massive production, over 100 yards multiple times. I think at the high ADOT and what he is, because he's a little bit of a higher ADOT guy, I think part of the issue with McBride for people is they're like, it's just receptions, and they think it's just volume. And so, well, I don't know. I said it. The reason I ranked McBride lower is I flat out think people are just wrong about Trey McBride. They're like stupid about Trey McBride or something. And so I'm confused. But McBride should.
The interesting thing too with McBride is maybe it comes from people not watching the games, and I can understand if you're not doing it for a living that like tuning in and watching the Arizona Cardinals is probably not on the first thing on your list on Sundays or Mondays or Tuesdays or what have you. But it actually is appointment viewing from the perspective of Trey McBride is that good. If you actually watched him play, there's nothing with the ADOT that makes you remotely concerned.
Right.
Because he's constantly coming free deep down the field as well. And the ferocity with which he plucks those balls out of the air and then looks for defenders.
Yeah.
The way that he vaults them. I mean, there's just no question about it if you've watched Trey McBride play. I mean, everything about the stats, which are extraordinary, still don't do him justice. Just like if you go back now and you look at Calvin Johnson's numbers and you're like, oh, 1,900-yard season in a 16 game. I mean, that was probably pretty good. I mean, if you haven't actually watched Calvin Johnson play, you have no idea what it was like.
I agree entirely about the McBride thing. It's a great analogy that of Calvin Johnson. It's an analogy of like, if you weren't watching it, you don't understand how unique it is to watch. We've been saying this about Trey McBride on our Sunday night shows for years. We did it 2 years ago in the 2024 season. That was like our nightly thing. And then we both, going into the offseason, we're like, Trey McBride's the tight end 1 for next year, right? Yeah, he's tight end 1. We both had him ranked tight end 1 all offseason. He went like tight end 3 or whatever last offseason. This is Bauer's rookie year, whatever. I'm getting my years mixed up. But this is, I guess, we've been talking about him on the Sunday night show since 2023, I guess, because it was the 2024 offseason that we were this high on McBride, et cetera, et cetera. Super fun. The Loveland point, though, just to wrap it up, I think he's going to consolidate a lot of volume in a really good Ben Johnson offense that's only going to get better. I mean, we both really like Caleb Williams as a potential breakout. And then Burden is the kind of higher risk thing here, right? We both put him in our 3rd round. We both put him in our just missed. Like, he's still going to be really good, but already having the injury to miss most of August as well sets him back a little bit. Adunze, I think, is going to have a better year than people realize too, probably just because there's going to be so much volume for these 3 guys to be the whole passing game. And Johnson, I think, is going to do a good job of getting that stuff consolidated to his playmakers. He did it with the Lions. He did a really good job of getting the ball to the playmakers that he wanted to get the ball to back in Detroit. So that's our first round. So we go to the second round. You had Puka Nacua at 201, Jonathan Taylor at 202, as I mentioned. You had Loveland at 203. You have Breece Hall at 204, Tyler Warren at 205. I have Breece Hall at 202. I have Ken Walker at 203, who you had all the way up at 106. And you just kind of briefly mentioned, but I think gave a good case that like he's just going to be the best player on the whole offense. And it snapped into my mind of like, yeah, the Andy Reid, Brian Westbrook years back in Philly. Like, he's just going to be the dude. And the wide receivers didn't matter back then. They had like James Thrash, Todd Pinkston and stuff.
And it's really easy to pattern match to what they've done recently, which has been pretty running back negative. But this is where it is important to understand just personnel and understand that the Chiefs didn't have a starting caliber running back, didn't have a backup caliber starting running back. All of that changes when you actually have a guy who deservedly was, Super Bowl MVP, best player for the Seahawks in the playoffs. I mean, there are some concerns about Walker's running style that probably don't apply to the other people we have in the first 18 picks. Maybe that actually will manifest, but man, I mean, there's an upside scenario there where Andy Reid is just like exactly what you're saying, back to the good old days. And I mean, before you're talking about Donovan McNabb, I mean, this is with this is with Patrick Mahomes, who, I mean, the reports about him have been glowing as everything else about the Chiefs training camp has been a train wreck.
So I had Breece Hall 202, Walker 203, Jefferson 204. Jefferson for you comes in at 208. I have Neighbors 205. I mentioned you had Neighbors 112. So we both have him, in this range. I wanted Neighbors higher. I added both Breece and Walker literally during the show at 202 and 203. And then I have McBride 206 now. So those guys all kind of slid down. Again, huge asterisks around my early second round. But Jefferson, Neighbors, McBride all come in there. And then I go Amon-Ra St. Brown, a name we have not said yet or put on a list yet. We've talked about him. Tyler Warren and Christian McCaffrey at 209. Spoiler, you have Christian McCaffrey not just out of the second round, but at 312. So you're thinking that next. So part of the reason I put him at 209 is even if he gets hurt, if he plays some, he's going to score probably pretty well. And there's going to be people that are like, you still have to draft Christian McCaffrey. What if he stays healthy? He's only 30. Like he's going to be 31 next year. He's going to be old, but I think the peripherals would have to really, really crater for people to not talk themselves into Christian McCaffrey before 312. So I think you're crazy there. I took.
You don't think it's a little bit like an Alvin Kamara thing where
not with McCaffrey? He's multiple 30-point seasons. Kamara never scored like that. It's McCaffrey. That's the thing that people talk themselves into. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah. McCaffrey's rushing was really bad.
It was
last year. And one of the things that was interesting for Kamara is that he put up negative wins above replacement by SIS for multiple seasons before he actually fell off from a fantasy perspective. But I think with Christian McCaffrey, you have some of that concern. Christian McCaffrey is way better than Alvin Kamara, and his receiving is extraordinary. But you do have this injury problem that just continues. Now, as we record this, they're saying that if this was a game week, he could play. One of the things that popped up again in that injury study that makes me very sad, because I hate having to track this stuff. I hate having to be skeptical about people who are injured. I really want to do it based on how good players are. And even with all the zero running back stuff and talking about chaos and talking about, sadly, people get hurt. If you have someone really good behind them, that's a cheat code type of thing. It's still, I would prefer everyone just to be healthy and we could just do all of this with health. All of the little nagging things are not good. And so I guess that's the thing. I mean, I think it's pretty implied, but we have aggressive rankings on Jeremiah Love and Malik Neighbors. And I guess I would say that I think Neighbors is now overpriced for 2026. And we had a very fun main event with Pat and Pete on ship chasing just last night. In terms of when this releases, it may be a little bit more distance, but anybody who's interested in that, go check it out. We took Jeremiah Love at the 3-4 turn. I think that is problematic, perhaps. But with both of those guys, I see a second half of 2026 where they are just so clearly transcendent players that if they play poorly in the first half, which I expect them to do, but they emerge cleanly from the second half and score big in the fantasy playoffs. And this kind of gets back to your question at the beginning with TreVeyon Henderson, like good or bad pick if most of the production is late and is in the fantasy playoffs. I mean, for Neighbors, we're now in the late second round. I think you've got to score all season. It doesn't really set up that way for him. With Love, it's trickier. But I do think they'll be so good down the stretch that when people are saying, like, if you have a healthy 2027 offseason for those guys going into the actual year, I mean, I don't know how you don't pick. I mean, Malik Neighbors is just a completely different thing, even than, say, that Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson. Maybe that'll turn out to be silly. I mean, it's probably impossible to gap those guys. But that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Do you think that's the right way to think about it with these guys who are currently injured, that we have them so aggressively ranked, even though I mean, do you agree with me that their prices are now, especially Neighbors' prices, now wrong?
I have Neighbors a little higher. I did have one subscriber who has done some of his own pretty intense injury research comment on a post when I talked about Neighbors optimistically after some of his early videos. And I wouldn't be able to repeat everything he told me, but it's stuck in my head a little bit. And essentially it was that the video that we saw was him cutting one direction, but the specific knee injury that he had was going to be a problem for him cutting the other direction, whether it was left or right. I can't remember, but it was like, yeah, it would make sense that he looks fluid cutting that direction. What we're concerned about is whether he can cut the other way off of that other knee or whatever. If you see any videos of him cutting that other direction and looking that fluid, and I mean, it really stuck with me. I don't know anything about this stuff. I think the injury stuff's really, really hard to parse, obviously. But it stuck with me from a perspective of like, yeah, maybe I was too quickly to be like, yeah, he looks 100%. You know, I mean, not 100%, but he looks close enough. And my take on Malik Neighbors is that I think he has talent to burn. Like I'm concerned about like Zach Charbonnet rushing back, and I always say it's because I don't even think he was like that great to begin with. And so now you have like the potential to be a little bit worse. And how much talent did Zach Charbonnet have to give up? I mean, he's a downhill runner and all of that, but maybe he'll be all right, you know, because he is a downhill runner and all those things. With Neighbors, it's an element of, I think he's made some good catches like in the back of the end zone in some of these videos. I think he was so talented in so many ways at creating the different separation. His like some of the videos of him decelerating and stuff already look so good. And it's like cornerbacks are like blown off on that. And I mean, if you're still that good at getting up to speed and then decelerating that fast, even when you're not 100%, like it's still going to create separation is sort of the idea. And so, I mean, his whole thing is like, he can earn targets on every route at every depth. And then he's really good at the ball in his hand. And maybe he won't be as good at the ball in his hand. And maybe he won't be as good at creating separation. If no one else in that offense, he's still going to create enough separation that they're going to have to throw his direction. I don't know. It's hard for me with the Neighbors is overvalued thing. And the way that you said it, I was going to ask you, you said it doesn't set up that way for him in 2026 now. My question is, why not? Because they don't have anyone else. I mean, Isaiah Likely barely played in that preseason game. People think he's like their number 2 receiver because there's nobody. And they're not even paying attention to the fact that he's like, he only ran routes on like third downs in the preseason. He's like a rotational player, which he always was under John Harbaugh, but everyone's like, well, they paid him, so they're going to use him. Well, I mean, free agent contracts are big. They paid him because John Harbaugh wanted him. He knows the system. He wanted another good player. Doesn't mean he's going to suddenly use him differently than he's always used him. That's the coach that's always used him limited ways. Anyway, it's not a likely conversation. The point is people are overlooking that because there's no one else in this pass game, and it's easy to see a second role that could be very valuable. Who else is going to get, like, how does it not set up? I mean, I think you think he's going to be pretty compromised in the first half is what you're saying.
I do. And I mean, the fact that they've had to protect him so much through this time period. One of the things that came out with the injury stuff that I didn't put into the article was that avoiding PUP was actually huge. And so that part is good. But these guys who avoided and are not practicing with the full team, we're just not that far away from the season for the players who are still so protected. And again, there are different, I think the point you made about the different talent levels is huge because how much you can give away is gigantic. I mean, one of the things that really bums me out with Tucker Kraft, because I mean, he's like 100% owned and dynasty kind of guy, is just that, I mean, you're already talking about somebody who needed to add volume because the sustainability of the efficiency is just not really there. Even if you think he's the best tight end in the NFL, it's going to be tough. They have these other guys. Now the other guys are injured a bunch too. So it could come down to just Tucker Kraft, but you're looking at him as the second half of the season play. And so I think if you're looking at guys as second half of the season plays, then the price has to be right for that. Malik Neighbors is so good that if he is basically like a 400-point level guy over a full second half, the price is pretty good here. And it is in a little bit of a weird spot where with Tyler Warren and Breece Hall having the groin injuries, you know, I've seen Zay Flowers get pulled way up, and Zay Flowers is very good, but I think that half of Malik Neighbors is better than a full season of Zay Flowers. Nico Collins is now an interesting pick there with Higgins out. I don't think he was before. Chris Olave now interesting with Tyson out. I don't think he was before. So there's that mix. I guess even though, we're talking about CeeDee Lamb in the first round or the 1-2 turn, I mean, George Pickens is just so clean. And again, so it's got a little bit of a portfolio thing too, where if you're going to do a bunch of teams, you have a bunch of picks in the 101, 102. So that's the area you're always coming back to. I mean, you probably don't want George Pickens on every team, in part because despite all the positive reviews for Pickens this year, you don't simply stop being a wild
crazy
card.
Person.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said he's so clean, and I'm like, wait a minute.
So you have all that. You're in a little bit of a dead spot there, which is, it's so weird that like this is maybe the most fun year to ever draft. In round 7, round 8, round 9, round 10, round 11, those rounds are loaded. Ben, they're absolutely loaded. The fact that the 2-3 turn and like all of round 4 are not the type of players that you would want for that, even though when we look forward to 2027, we're saying, I mean, these rounds are really strong. So that's the part that is kind of fun, where like 19 to 36 this year, I don't know this that strong, but on our lists, I'm like, how can we get more guys in? How can we get more guys in? I mean, you mentioned where you have Colston Loveland. I'm like, Bennett, for me to put Colston Loveland in there, I'd have to put him ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I mean, no chance in hell. I'd have to put him ahead of Puka Nacua. I'd have to put him ahead of Jahmyr Chase. I'd have to put him ahead of Bijan Robinson. I mean, there's just no way. And
put him ahead of some of those guys. All right. I put him ahead of Jonathan Taylor. You're like, there's no chance in hell. No, I think Loveland can have a pretty monster season. With the way that his efficiency can be. One of the things in my projections that you look at like his yards per target versus like McBride's. The McBride ADOT thing, I loved your point about that. It's not that relevant, but it is vaguely relevant just from the perspective that drives stuff like ADOT. Now, one of the things, like yards per target. One of the things because like Trey McBride, for as amazing as he is, has not had a yards per target over 8 yet in his career. His 2 highs were 7.8 last year. It was 7.3. Part of that's because he had 169 targets. You get that much volume funneled to you over and over and over again. Your yards per target comes down a little bit, but the yards per reception down a little last year at 9.8. It was 10.2, 10.3 the second 2 seasons. The rookie year was lower on lower volume as well. He wasn't great that rookie season. Part of the thing is when you kind of like go through the projection from that perspective. I mean, Colston Loveland had an 8.7 yards per target last year, 12.3 yards per reception. Some of that was driven by that one massive play late in that game against the Bengals. But I mean, it was significantly higher because of a higher ADOT. And so I had McBride for meaningfully more targets, but I actually had him close in yardage because of the way that Loveland's volume and yardage per target and all that manifests. And then the reason I'm so into Loveland is I think I was low on the targets with Burden getting hurt. I did this projection in July and I haven't updated, but with Burden getting hurt in through August, and I just don't know that I'm that crazy about a Dunze and the way that Ben Johnson calls things and sort of thinks players, not plays. I think he does that. I always use that with McDaniel, but I think it's very much a Ben Johnson trade as well. Just saw a tweet the other day about, or a post from their practice about the run game also creating a bunch of explosives, and like Ben Johnson isn't thinking. It referenced that Robert Saleh quote about the jabs and the haymakers, and it said basically that I can't remember who had it, but it said that the run game's not a jab, it's a haymaker, and then the pass game's also a haymaker, and then everything's just haymakers, and like good luck. Like that's what Ben Johnson's doing. And they're going to do the big tight end stuff, and they're going to run, and they're going to run effectively, and then they're going to throw off of that. And I just think Colston Loveland's going to be an efficient receiver.
The Chicago Bears were the weirdest team last season because they didn't have that much talent. Their quarterback was not playing that well. Their running backs were DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. And when they ran the ball, it looked like the opposing defense had 8 players on the field.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they're going to do that again. I think Swift's a good pick, I'm realizing, with Monangai getting a little bit banged up in camp. And I'm like, I want to draft some DeAndre Swift, which is absurd. You're like, really? I don't know if I want it.
So one of the things with the McBride Loveland sort of comparison that you had there, I think with the Burden injury, that there is this upside with Colston Loveland to not just be good, but to finish as like the going away tight end 1. And if he does that, obviously he's going to go middle of the first round. I do think there's an element where Trey McBride is Stephon Diggs after he's traded to the Bills, where he's allowed to do everything. And Colston Loveland is Stephon Diggs when he's with the Vikings and is the vertical guy. And maybe it plays out that way. Maybe it doesn't. The thing that is also interesting is that Tylan Warren is almost the opposite, right? Where we both have him in vaguely the same area. And he's another guy who can pull up there. It'll be fascinating, I think, to see what the structural element is with tight ends in 2027. I think that some young guys could flash late and push in there. My thesis, maybe it's just what I dream of happening, although I don't actually dream of it happening because I think that the current situation is very exploitable. But you have this tier of elite tight ends that is so potent and that gaps the dead zone tight ends so clearly that drafters finally move into the direction where you have the elite tight end tier valued appropriately, and then you have this gulf down to these guys who are just guys and are going to have volume in their offenses and can catch the ball when it's there, and you could start them if you needed to. I think it will be a lot of fun if we actually get that next wave of players. If Harold Fannin is able to join it, if you have one of the rookies get healthy enough and or get involved enough to move. If you have that, if you have, like, say 2 more guys, whoever they are, join this 4-player group, do you then have it really deflating the players after that top 6, or does it just continue to pull everybody up? One of the things that just seems so exploitable right now is that people still are reluctant to draft the elite tight ends, but they're reluctant to get gapped so much that a lot of tight ends who simply are not going to score enough points to justify their ADPs are pretty pricey.
I think
that's probably the exploitable area.
That's why I think the top 4 are going to go in the first 20 picks. And it's the way you have it as well, is I think that's what's going to happen. I think people are going to realize that I think right now there's a lot of people out there talking about the move to more tight ends, and tight ends are scoring more, and they're not parsing well enough, that, like the Isaiah Likely point I just made, that a lot of these guys are not going to run enough routes. They're going into multi-tight end sets that are going to be very multi-dimensional. They're going to use that multiplicity to their advantage, and it's going to impact routes. The guy, like last year, AJ Barner gets drafted in all these drafts. His routes were like pretty decent. He scored a bunch of touchdowns. He's like the ceiling scenario when you're in that kind of a scenario, but like he didn't even run that many routes, and people are like convinced that he had like a breakout year. He's going to run more and all these things. I guess my point is, I mean, he's a positive outcome, but like that's the ceiling, is that you stack a bunch of touchdowns like he did. He had like a rushing TD, and then he caught a bunch of TDs, but his receptions and yards and stuff weren't even that good. And Elijah Arroyo was a rookie, is a year 2 guy now. If his touchdown rate comes down, I think he's like going to get cut in most places where he got drafted, because he's not going to be running enough routes. And there's a lot of these situations that I think are going to be where they do the heavy tight ends that are going to be similar. I don't think that's going to happen at Loveland, because I think he's going to stay on the field in all situations. I think your Diggs note is very interesting. But as far as what the 4 guys do, and then one other thing I wanted to say is, you were talking about Loveland and Warren and how Warren could also come up. I know you know this, but I would say it to the listeners, and I keep hearing about Warren. At the beginning of the offseason, I was like, Warren should be closer to Loveland. And then as I dug in more, I kind of changed my perspective. I have Loveland in the same tier as McBride and Bowers. He was an age 21 rookie last year. You've talked about this constantly. You've talked about all the great work Blair does. When you do what he did at age 21, it's different. Tyler Warren is almost 2 full years older. He's about 22 months older. I just looked up their birthdays and everything. He was age 23 rookie last year. He's already 24. Loveland's going into his age 22 season. There is a, Loveland trajectory that's Bowers and McBride-esque. It's not necessarily guaranteed to happen, but that's part of what I'm differentiating between Loveland and Warren, is the 2-year age gap. And it's not just age, is just a number for a lot of people. They don't understand when I reference the Blair work and everything. What that work shows is that when you come in that young and you're that productive that young, you have more room for growth. You have more room to get better, which logically makes sense. You are a lot younger as you produce. There could be next steps to him, or he could just sort of be near his peak and not get that much better. But that's the potential for Loveland is that he becomes something very unique at the position as well. But I agree with you. I think these 4 guys are going to be so good this year, all of them, and people are going to realize there's a big gap. And I don't think people put enough weight on how big of a gap there was last year, because only the McBride owner, if you're playing in a fantasy league and you only have to play McBride one time in the regular season and he drafted poorly the rest of the way, you're like, yeah, I didn't need any tight end points. Nobody was gapping me at tight end points. If this happens, what we're talking about, and you get stomped 4 weeks in a row by people who have great tight ends, and you lose 4 weeks in a row because they're putting up 20 points against you every week, and you can only muster 5 at tight end, and you're like, man, I'm losing so many points at tight end every single week. And then there's no one else out there that's scoring any points. Or you said some of the young guys might, but if that is sort of the way that it plays out, I think next year drafters will finally get it with elite tight ends. That's my thesis, that they'll see the difference between elite tight ends and these offenses that use a lot of tight ends, 12 and 13 personnel, but are not functional for fantasy tight ends. And drafters will be like, I got to get me one of those 4 in a tight end premium format, or else I'm going to be chasing a bunch of different builds that have a lot of tight end points. And you're not just dodging one guy.
And it's fair to say that the opportunity cost is massive too. You're going to lose a superstar running back or a superstar wide receiver off of your roster, but it's a little bit of the same logic as, why you would draft a Josh Allen, which is that in most cases, maybe it's just a wash, but you simply then can't compete with the manager who drafted these guys and then drafted well on top of it. You can't compete with the manager who has an elite tight end and then their team was healthy. You just simply can't compete with them because they do have an extra spot.
So, Shawn, I'm going to have to rip off a lot of information for the listeners because unfortunately I have a appointment today. I thought we'd be able to do this in 2 hours. It was an absurd thought. But I'm going to let the people know what we have. We weren't sure if we were going to do just the first round or the first 2. We kind of went into the second round. We're kind of doing the shows differently these days. People have figured that out. We're kind of just having fun with it. We're not like trying to optimize for anything at all. So apologies to anyone who wants some stuff, but I'm going to rip off my whole second round because I had gone almost through, and then I'm going to do yours. I had skipped my 201. It's Devon Achane. You have him in your third round. I wanted to have a little conversation about him. My quick note on him is I think he's going to be good and yet not score well, but good enough, fun enough that if they don't have Malik Willis next year, people will be back in on Devon Achane at the 201. I think you're thinking he's not going to score well enough. We're both pretty concerned about the receiving and some of that stuff. And so he falls to the third round. I think you can go either way with it. But I was basically saying I think Devon Achane is a long view, very fun player and a good explosive player, and he's going to do fun stuff. We're going to give him a ton of work this year. He's not going to score as well as people think. But if the offensive situation changes next year, people might be back in. So I had him 201 in that same group with like JT and all those guys. And then I had Breece, Walker, Jefferson, Neighbors, McBride, Amon-Ra, Warren, CMC. I had already said all those. And then I had A.J. Brown at 10, or I threw him in there. Garrett Wilson was a name I had snuck in to my back of my second round. I had him basically middle of the second round, had to move him back. I think he's going to get a ton of volume. I think this is a Garrett Wilson breakout season. Chase Brown at 212. The guy that got bumped was Jameson, I mentioned. I think Jameson's the Pickens of this year, and I think people are going to draft him like it. That was the he who could not be named that you mentioned earlier. James Cook also got bumped from my back end of my second round as I started adding people during the show. I think I had Harold Fannin at 212. I mentioned TreVeyon. A bunch of guys got bumped. But that was the first names that I had in my second round that are no longer in my second round because I was changing my lists during the show. Your second round, Puka Nacua, Jonathan Taylor, Colston Loveland, Breece Hall at 204, Tyler Warren at 205. You had A.J. Brown at 206. This is the one I want to get your thoughts on before we go. Chase Brown, 207, Justin Jefferson, 208. Specifically that you had Brown over Jefferson. I thought we had the same 5 receivers as our top 5, just in a different order, where I had Puka, Chase, JSN, Lamb, Jefferson. Or sorry, that's top 6. I had Puka, Chase, JSN, Lamb, Jefferson, Neighbors. You had JSN, Lamb, Chase, Neighbors, Puka, but you didn't even have Jefferson next. You had A.J. Brown come in there, and then Jefferson at 208. You have Pickens 209, who I dropped out probably unfairly. You have Tedero McMillan 210, who I also dropped out. Again, offensive. It's for me, the point would be the offensive volume concerns that I feel like he was a hit, and he's already a late third fourth round pick, despite being a clear year 2 profile to buy. And we're not even like pounding the table to buy him because, again, the offense I think Bryce Young's bad. And then you go Bashal Tootin, who I love at 211, and Quinshon Judkins. I promised the listeners you had a couple year 2 guys snuck in there. You have Tootin, Judkins. I'm worried about the Browns offense. I had them as, just missed guys as well. Your just missed was Amon-Ra outside the second round. And then you also have Scadaboo there. I have Scadaboo much further down my third round. I'll go to the just missed in a second. Like you had Garrett Wilson in there. You had Achane in your just missed. You also had James Cook. We both have James Cook falling out of the top 2 rounds over concerns about what the volume actually looks like. Everyone wants him to just add receiving. He had 300 plus rushes last year for the first time. It's not that easy to just add a bunch more work for a guy like him. I think you've said that you think he's going to lose a lot of rushing in addition to the receiving. I think they're just going to keep optimizing for the rushing because they really like his explosive run rate. They're going to try to throw to the backs a little bit, but it's not going to make that much of a difference in my mind. And I think it's going to be pretty tough for him to keep up the level of efficiency he has in some of those things. So I actually think the receiving is going to come in a lot lower than a lot of the optimism there. But we both have Cook out of the second round. I want to ask you about Brown at 206, because that's a lot of optimism from you about A.J. Brown than relative to what I've heard from you in the last couple of years. And then Pickens and McMillan, Tootin, Judkins, all 4 of those guys at the end are guys that I didn't rank. Maybe pick 1 or 2 of those that you think is pretty interesting.
So A.J. Brown has been the similar caliber receiver to these other guys, but has been with the Titans and the Eagles, which means the volume simply isn't there. You had mentioned earlier in the show that the Rams, either they failed to trade for him or didn't stay in the mix because of concerns about the knee. That's a bit of a problem as you get old. And I do think there were times last year where he looked old. At the same time, you're now moving into a situation where Drake May is your quarterback. I think that Drake May as a fantasy quarterback is overvalued. But when we think about him finally unlocking A.J. Brown, especially when the Patriots have no other players, right? Romeo Doubs is limited enough that the Packers didn't want to play him, didn't want to keep him. Kayshon Boutte is somebody who doesn't separate and successfully catches these deep balls. A.J. Brown is reportedly burning the Patriots' elite corners and elite defense repeatedly in practice. I mean, maybe it's just that it's fun to put him there once and be like, this could be the season. He'll have a massive year. People will still be willing to draft him when he is another year older because of Drake May, right? And all of the people who are desperate for A.J. Brown to be a Ja'Marr Chase level player his whole career, they get a season of that. He's not going to fall below the middle of the second round after they actually get that season. So that would be the thesis. I mean, there are some worries with him. Once you're getting old, once you have some injuries, the thing with not having other weapons in the passing offense kind of cuts both ways, where your volume, your target share could be extraordinarily high. You always mention the piano on the back thing. I mean, he's such a big guy. He looks big when he's running. I do think there are probably things that defenses can do if none of the other Patriots receivers emerge. And certainly that's what you're getting from camp, is just him.
You're really loving Pickens, and you think McMillan can be so good this year that he actually rises to the second round.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like DeAndre Hopkins, right? I mean, that's the kind of rookie season he had, a little bit better than Hopkins. That's where he goes. The reporting that you get from camp with the Panthers is when you talk about how bad Bryce Young is, and it's like, yeah, Bryce Young, he just can't play. Tetron McMillan and Jalen Coker are awesome. Now, how does that resolve when you have a terrible quarterback and you have these young receivers who are fantastic? They lose the guy they drafted who would have been an interesting deep threat. They probably are not going to get much of a season from Hubbard. Jonathan Brooks, super high ceiling, massive risk. I mean, part of my thesis has always been that like the Panthers can't do what they did last year, which is to just try and pretend like they don't even want to play. See if we how few plays can our game have, and can we randomly win at the end because we're in the NFC South? Like this season, the quarterback, the head coach, they have to go out and play. Is Bryce Young, JJ McCarthy levels bad? I don't think he's that bad. And then Tetron McMillan, I think, is that good.
What
And
about
probably Coker doesn't actually take as much target volume as the positives for him would indicate. But Millen is just so good in every area that, I mean, he's going to be a target monster.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's going to get a ton of volume. It seems, I don't know. It seems weird, but one of the big things could just be that they try a little bit more. I mean, they were good enough last year to wind up winning the division and win-loss good enough, but they were still like a minus 61 point differential, which is just massive. If you don't if you go look at the list of point differentials, it's so low. If you win enough games to win a division, you really have to win every game by 3 points, and you have to lose every game by double digits to get to minus 61 points. When you win 8 games and lose 9, it's crazy. It's crazy. The difference, it's like, if they were exactly 500, 8-8, like the difference of your wins and losses is like almost 10 points to get to minus 60, it's just insane. But they, as part of that, when they were losing, they were one of these teams that just completely gave up and didn't play in the fourth quarter and didn't care, and they moved on to next week. Well, if they're worse in win-loss, you've said this to me this offseason, are they going to be able to do that? Are they going to be able to just pack it in and give up? Or are they going to actually have to try to garbage time at it a little bit? Make it respectable. Like their season was already respectable in win-loss last year. So they could just pack it in, take their lumps and move on to next week. This year may not work out that way, and that may lead to a lot more volume.
And I mean, every week is a huge leverage point for NFL players and coaches. I'm probably exaggerating the difference between what they were actually experiencing last year and what they'll be experiencing this year. But I mean, this is an end of the career season for Canales and Young. I mean, they've got to bring it.
End of career season. I love that. We'll have to talk Tootin, Judkins, Scadaboo guys a little more next time, but your honorable mention list: Amon-Ra St. Brown, Scadaboo, Makai Lemon, Luther Burden, Devon Achane, James Cook, Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson, Jonathan Brooks. In the back, you threw in Kenyon Sadiq, Harold Fannin, and then Christian McCaffrey at 312. I had this huge cluster around the 2-3 turn that I mentioned, included Jameson, James Cook, Harold Fannin, TreVeyon Henderson, because I had to add people that I had left out hilariously. My rest of my honorable mentions were Bashal Tootin. He was in my honorable mention already. Was Bashal Tootin, Judkins. I had Jadarian Price in there. I think he has a better season than people probably realize and is in a good spot going into next year. Lemon. I did throw Jordan Tyson in there because I think we might get enough late in the year and then people will be optimistic going into next year. I had Casey Concepcion in there. I had Luther Burden. I threw Matthew Golden in there. I think Matthew Golden could have a good enough year for the Packers that next year he's viewed as essentially the clear number one if he takes over that Dobbs role. I don't really love the talent profile enough to be I'm going to put him in the second round, but you can imagine a year where he's the number one going into next year. The offense throws a little more. Josh Jacobs is aged out or is not the dude anymore. It looks a little bit more optimistic for pass volume, and Golden is the year 3 guy that people are drafting in the 3rd round. Jonathan Brooks, Cam Scadaboo, and the last guy that I had in there was Terrence Ferguson. You brought up Kenyon Sadiq.
People, come on.
I brought in Terrence Ferguson, and I meant it. No, Sean, what do you mean? He can have the whole thing on Terrence Ferguson is he could come out of absolutely nowhere like Kyron Williams did and Puka Nacua did. And if Terrence Ferguson does that, then he's a clear 3rd round pick in tight end premium. I mean, we can just keep pretending that that's what's going to happen until it doesn't happen, right?
You can. I mean, but for next season, isn't it Max Clare then is the guy? Next man up?
Yeah, well, I thought you were going to be telling me about Jarquez Hunter this offseason. I don't know how we became a Blake Corum show, but you're a big Blake Corum guy now.
It's so sad, Ben. It's so sad. The people who are actually at Rams and Eagles practices claim that this year, as opposed to the past. Now, I mean, are you going to believe him now when they were unreliable in the past? But evidently, Jarquez Hunter is not good. Will Shipley is not good. Sad dreams to die.
Sad dreams to die. We always do a super flex one, too. Sean has Lamar at the 101, and then he goes JSN, Gibbs, Bowers, Jeanty, Daniels at the 106, and then he goes a bunch more non-QBs until the 111. Sean thinks in Superflex next year, only 2 quarterbacks will be drafted before the 111. I think there's a little bit of bias seeping in there. He hates drafting quarterbacks early in super flex.
Then the ADP for these guys has completely
come down a little bit. Josh Allen at 111 doesn't seem likely to me, but it does speak to how optimistic you are about all of the non-QBs having big seasons near the top. Allen, Burrow, Caleb Williams at 201 for you. And then you have Herbert all the way back at 205 after 3 more non-QBs. You had Allen, Burrow, Caleb at 11, 12, and 201. And then it's Jeremiah Love, Bijan, Chase, and Herbert. And then you go Neighbors, Nacua, Taylor, and then Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott before Loveland and Breece Hall close out your top 24. My top 24, the non-quarterbacks aren't going to be right because I had to add a bunch of dudes. But I actually started with Lamar, Allen, Daniels, Herbert. I think that people like Allen will still have another good year and people will still take him 102. But I think, Daniels belongs right there. And then Herbert's the one that I thought deserved to be up there. I think he has the MVP season and people are that excited about him. You have him a gap down from even Caleb Burrow and those guys, which I thought was interesting. How
does he fit? I mean, I know we're rushing to finish here, but how does he fit compared to, say, Baker Mayfield with the spike season? One of the things that you referenced last night when we were drafting and passed on Matthew Stafford was the massive season for him. Obviously, Herbert believed to be a bigger talent than Mayfield, and he's younger than Matthew Stafford. You don't think there's going to be an element there? I mean, it's basically a thing where he becomes Joe Burrow, you're saying.
Well, I mean, the thing that's different between him and those guys is that he actually does run a little bit. I don't think he's going to run as much this year, but Justin Herbert was second in the NFL in QB rushing yards last year. And I don't think people would ever guess that. He had 498 rushing yards last year, second in the league behind only Josh Allen. And there's other, like Jalen Hurts played as many games as him and had meaningfully less rushing yardage. Drake May was meaningfully lower. Jackson Dart's the closest guy and missed a couple games. So you can say Dart's yards per game were higher, but there's a lot of mobile QBs that did not. The guys you are comparing him to are less mobile. I think Herbert's going to add enough with the legs. And then like the season that I'm saying he has this year to go there next year is also one where he throws 40 touchdowns. I mean, and wins the MVP, but I think he adds some stuff with the legs as well in a pretty meaningful way. It's basically what happened to Drake May after last year is going to happen to Herbert. People are going to go, oh, but the problem is May probably doesn't belong going quite as high as he is because the rushing has kind of regressed a little in year 2.
You don't think it was a thing where, I mean, those are really good points. Hopefully Herbert does score that well. The first main event that you and I did, we selected him. It seemed like part of the rushing last year, and he's had this before too, so this is not like out of nowhere by any stretch, but there's a running for his life element that they have been like, that's the number one priority for this season, is that Justin Herbert gets the ball out, doesn't have to run, doesn't take the risk. And they have too many other guys that you just prefer to have the ball in their hands.
And maybe the rushing goes like to completely zero. There's actually precedent for that. Daniel Jones is one of the guys who had a 700-yard rushing season a few years back. And one of the fascinating things about him with the Colts last year is he had under 200 rushing yards before tearing that Achilles. And if you're like optimistic about the Colts offense going into this year, it's very similar to what you said. He was getting the ball out. So not having an Achilles, he doesn't need the mobility. He used to be a 700 rushing yard guy once. He did that once upon a time that year with Brian Dable when everyone was running way too much. I think it was 2022. And last year he had like 180 rushing yards or something. It's a way, way different quarterback profile at that point for a guy who was leading the best offense in football through 10 games. And he's not using his legs at all. Maybe that happens with Herbert. So maybe I have him too high here. Caleb and May for me was the next tier. And then I had a bunch of skill guys. And then I had Burrow, Mahomes, Hurts, and Dak, bunch of skill guys. I did a third round on this too. And I threw Kyler, Lawrence, Purdy, and I threw Mendoza in there in that next group. Because if we think
I like to see, that's what
Burrows and Jeanty are going to be this good, then Mendoza's got to be a third round pick. So that was the kind of super flex stuff. I got all of our honorable mentions. I think we talked about most of it. We'll have to talk more about like Tootin, Judkins, some of those guys next show. Again, I apologize to the viewers, the listeners, whatever. I do have a thing that I can't miss that I got to get to. But this is my favorite exercise every year. It was super, super fun. I'm going to run through the top 24 for both of us one more time in tight end premium. Sean's was Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jahmyr Gibbs, Brock Bowers, Ashton Jeanty, Omarion Hampton, Walker, McBride, Lamb, Love, Robinson, Chase, Neighbors, Nacua, JT Loveland, Breece Hall, Warren, AJ Brown, Chase Brown, Jefferson, Pickens, McMillan, Tootin, and Judkins. Mine was Gibbs, Puka, Bowers, Chase, Bijan, Jeanty, Hampton, Loveland, JSN, Lamb, Love, JT. And then the second round was Achane, Brees, Walker, Jefferson, Neighbors, Trey McBride, Amon-Ra, Warren, CMC, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Chase Brown. We didn't even talk about Chase Brown, but we both have him sticking around the second round for a guy who doesn't have like that great long view profile. He's going to be good enough next year. He's going to stick around in the second round.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to go. So I can just cheat and throw out something you can't respond to, which is that your Chase Brown versus Devon Achane is way off.
All right. Thank the listeners.
Ben, give us the spot to find the Stealing Signals book. It is fantastic. How do they get it? How's the storefront look?
There's two storefronts. One is gretchy.gumroe.com/L/I/Stealing Signals. Man, I have no idea. The other one is at Lemon Squeezy. I mean, I don't. You gotta go to like my social media or something. I should know that. I should be able to tell you, Shawn. But you know what? I can pull it up. I'm gonna pull it up because it's important. I don't know about the Gumroad one, if that's an L or an I, but I can tell you that it's bengretch.lemonsqueezy, SQUEEZY.com/checkout. bengretch.lemonsqueezy.com/checkout is a place you can definitely get it.
That's the book. It's the best thing you'll read about fantasy football. Make sure you get that. The Zero RB Candidates Countdown is up at RotoViz. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.